Alright, good morning everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Uh, so, this is going to be our first lecture for our history optional crash course cum test series. Now, when is your first test? Next weekend है, ठीक है? So, first test में we are going to cover the first 7 chapters of ancient Indian history. That is from the sources of ancient Indian history right up to the Mauryan age. Okay. Now, what we have done over here is that we are going to have 4 different lectures to cover all these topics, right. So, from the first to the 14th chapter and अगले जो 2 lectures होंगे में हम first to 7th chapter cover. टेस्ट में सारे के सारे chapters आए first से लेकर के 14 तक. Now, from the sources to the Mauryan age, what we have done is we have divided this into sources, prehistory, that is the Paleolithic up to Neolithic age plus the Chalcolithic age, and one chapter which is given separately in your syllabus, that is the one on Megalithic age. That also we are going to cover over here. Then we have to talk about the Harappan civilization. This we are going to cover in our first lecture, that is today's lecture. For tomorrow's lecture, we are reserving the Vedic age, the post Vedic age is the Mahajanpad period, the Mauryan age and the post Mauryan age. This is going to be covered in tomorrow's lecture, right? And then our next 2 lectures for ancient India will be held in the next week on Thursday, on Friday and Saturday, and Sunday you are going to have your paper. Okay? So, this is going to give you ample time to revise all these chapters and prepare for the next phase as well. What we have decided to do is, instead of quickly covering each and every subtopic within these chapters, we have decided to conduct this crash course in the question and answer format. Now, for ancient India, there are roughly 50 to 60 themes that you need to be aware of out of all the 14 chapters, and in our lectures, in these 4 lectures on ancient India, we are going to cover roughly between 35 and 45 themes, and the other remaining themes that will be covered through the questions of your test series. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे crash course में सारे के सारे themes नहीं हम cover करेंगे. Some themes we are going to leave for you कि realistically possible भी नहीं है सारी themes cover करना इस छोटे से period में, and it is also going to give you a good chance to test your own skills and your preparation as well. Coming to the lecture itself, question and answer format में करना है हमें. First question is, Did ancient Indians lack a sense of historiography? Would it be correct to say that it was a grand contribution of Islam to India? 20 marker question है. You have about 250 words. Wish to write it. What are the demands of the question? You need to address the debate on whether ancient Indians lacked a sense of history or not. Okay? So what should be the strategy that should be followed? In the initial portion, should you make arguments in favor of this postulate or should you argue against it from the very beginning? पहले इसके फेवर में कुछ आर्ग्यूमेंट्स देने पड़ेंगे. इफ यू डोंट वांट टू गिव आर्ग्यूमेंट्स इन फेवर ऑफ दिस, एटलीस्ट एक्सप्लेन द पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ऑफ दोज स्कॉलर्स हु हैव सपोर्टेड दिस आर्ग्यूमेंट. ठीक है. तो over here debate type questions में it is important to cite the names of some scholars. So citations अगर आपके पास है तो it would be advantageous. नहीं भी है so you can still get away with the arguments without actually telling the examiner about the exact scholars who were involved with it. ठीक है. तो यहाँ पे first of all you have colonial historians. Such as Vincent Gordon Child, and H. Wilson, who have made the argument that Indian society was a changeless society. Marx ने क्या बोला? He gave the framework of Oriental despotism to describe this changeless society, and इन्होंने बोला है that since no historical change was taking place, there was no need for Indians to develop any sense of history. ठीक है. तो ओवर सिंप्लीफिकेशन कर दिया है. Why do you think the colonial historians were insisting upon the idea that Indian society was a changeless society? Were they writing an objective history or did they have an agenda? Agenda. क्या agenda था उनका? Justify the establishment of British rule and to make the argument that if any historical change takes place in Indian history at all, it is due to the incursion or due to the involvement of foreigners. ठीक है. So they say if India has to be taken from its backwardness to the modern age, the role of the British is very, very important since Indians have a changeless society. Therefore, they came up with this argument. Second, we have some classical scholars as well, such as Al-Biruni. He adopted a curatorial approach. That means his approach was like that of a curator in a museum. He was simply collecting different facts about Indian society, culture, its religion, its intellectual tradition, the development of education, Indian sciences, Indian philosophy, etc. Right? And what was his attitude about Indian learning, the progression of knowledge? Was he highly impressed with it? Yes, he was, but did he also criticize it? Yes. Kya? That Indians have lost their intellectual spark. They have become inward looking. They have started to stagnate intellect. This was the argument that he made, that intellectual curiosity is being deliberately suppressed by the intellectual class in order to maintain their dominance within society. Therefore, he made the argument that Indians lacked the necessary the necessary inquisitiveness to undertake the task of history writing, and any inquiry into the past led to what? Myth making instead of factual recording. Okay, that is the argument that he made. Then some modern scholars such as Professor Muhammad Habib, one of the prominent figures of the Aligarh school, was a Marxist historian. इन्होंने क्या बोला? That Indians actually lacked an indigenous sense of history. They later developed a sense of history, but it was a borrowed one. किसका contribution था ये? That of Islamic culture. It was only after the advent of Islamic rule in North India that proper systematic history started to be written. So it was a grand contribution of Islam to Indian history. ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गया पहला नजरिया, arguments in favor or at least putting forward the argument that has been. Now our task is to argue against this postulate. And who has led the charge over here in countering the traditional view on Indian history writing? Romila Thapar. She has said that first of all, we need to identify what exactly we mean when we say a sense of history. ठीक है, क्या बोला है इन्होंने? That the sense of history till now has been described, has been defined in accordance with the Western standards of academia. So a very Eurocentric definition of this particular sense of history has been given. Does Europe have a monopoly on history and history writing? Nahi, so it must be democratized, and hence she has tried to come up with a more objective criteria. She says that for any historical or any work of the past to qualify as a work of history, it must exhibit a definite sense of time. Okay? That the linear or cyclical flow of time is taking place and developments are being recorded in reference to the passing of time that is to be there in the historical works. Okay? The way in which such information is presented, whether it is presented in a purely factual manner or fact mixed with mythology, that does not matter. Okay? Further, she has said that there exist two forms of history. Externalized and embedded history. ठीक है? Externalized history is the one in which there is more focus on chronological and factual reporting. Embedded history is the one where historical reporting takes the back seat and the historical facts are dropped into a broader sea of mythology. तो ऑब्जेक्टिव कुछ और है, उसमें हिस्ट्री छुपा हुआ है. ठीक है, so she says that in India the ancient Indian intellectuals wrote which of these works? एक्सटर्नलाइज्ड फॉर्म्स और एम्बेडेड फॉर्म्स, बोथ, ठीक है, मोस्टली एम्बेडेड बट बोथ एग्जिस्टेड. ठीक है. Why mostly embedded? Because unlike European or Chinese or Greek or Arab scholars, where the priority of scholarly enterprise was to record the deeds of great personalities, was to record important events and developments and establish causal relationships among them, the main objective of Indian intellectuals of the ancient period was to manifest the four Purusharthas. That is Dharma, Arth, Kam and Moksha. Through their writings, the Indian scholars of the ancient period were trying to create a socio-economic and political framework for the maximization of these four Purusharthas in order to maintain order within the society and allow Indians to live a full life, to live a content and happy life. That was the main objective. And in such a scenario, objective history writing, factual history writing takes a backseat. But to say that Indians absolutely lacked a sense of history, that would be unfair. What Indians do lack was the westernized consciousness of history writing, and even if they had that consciousness, that was not the most important priority for them. Priority ही इसका अलग था. ठीक है. Is our task complete with this? या फिर कुछ supplementary information भी देना पड़ेगा? Some supplementary information will have to be given also, such as examples will have to be given. We can talk about later Vedic texts, Purans, epics, oral traditions, royal inscriptions, and royal archives. चरिताज बिल्कुल. तो चरिताज etc. Later Vedic texts such as Dan Stutis, Akhanyas etc. These are usually associated with the performance of different Vedic rituals. Their objective is to popularize the performance of Vedic rituals by associating the tales or narratives or achievements of great kings with. तो ये बोला जाएगा that such and such ruler performed such and such yagya and therefore he defeated such and such king and expanded his empire. ठीक है. So within the mythological narrative, the historical information is. Purans में we have a very clear conception of time, both linear as well as cyclical. What is the way in which time is viewed in the Purans? A kalpa consisting of several manvantaras, each manvantara made up of 4 mahayugas. Each mahayuga made up of 4 yugas, and each yuga consisting of thousands of years. ठीक है. every yuga of 1000 years, 4 such yugas make up one Mahayuga. 4 Mahayugas make up one Manvantra, that is the age of Manu, and several thousands of Manvantras make one Kalpa. Kalpa is the time between the creation of the universe and the destruction and then recreation of the universe. Okay? So, this depicts a linear progression of time and this depicts a cyclical progression of time. Trans depict a very advanced understanding of both these concepts. Historical narratives आपको कहाँ पे देखने के लिए मिलते हैं? In this cyclical understanding or linear understanding? Linear progression में, right? Then we have the Itihas tradition, that is the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, whether they are purely historical or partly historical, that is debatable, but they do consist of at least some verifiable information, right? Then the oral traditions such as the bardic narratives, Tamil literature, they eulogize their royal patrons through ballads or through big fragments of epics, etc., right? Royal inscriptions such as those of Ashok or the Prayag Prashasti of Samudragupta also give dynastic details and historical details about the important developments that took place during their reigns. Then the Arthashastra, Huensang and even later scholars mention that in each and every city there used to be a royal archive where historical information was recorded chronologically. In fact, even Al-Baruni reports that in the Shahi kingdom he was given access to the Shahi royal archives, right? Now, it is an unfortunate matter that none of them have survived to this date. Charitas such as the Harsh Charita of Banabhat, the Ram Charita, which revolves around the figure of the Pala emperor Rampal, right? They give important biographical information about the different rulers. ठीक है? And conclusion कैसे करना है हमें? Go back to the question. What was the question? Sense of history था या नहीं, और was it a grand contribution of Islam to India? यहाँ पे हमने contribution of Islam to historiography कहीं mention किया है? नहीं. First order of business would be to include the contribution of Islam. क्या बोलोगे? That history writing became the main focus of Indian scholarship following the beginning of Islamic rule. The writings of scholars such as Barni or Afif or Abul Fazl took Indian history writing to a new height. There was more focus upon chronological analysis and factual reporting rather than interspersing of fact with mythology. ठीक है? However, यहाँ पे ही काउंटर भी करना चाहिए आपको. This does not mean that Indians lacked a sense of history indigenously. For example, the Raj Tarangani of Kalhana it exhibits a mature sense of history. And do you think that this kind of a sense of history can emerge abruptly out of vacuum? No. So, probably Kalhana's Raj Tarangani was the final product of a long tradition of Indian history writing. Why such other examples are not available to us? Maybe an unfortunate accident of history. Okay? And then finally, you can write that the intellectual traditions of different times and different regions, are they always going to be the same or will they differ? They are variable. What may be considered important by one culture, one tradition, may not be considered important by another. No single tradition has a complete monopoly on the definition of history writing. While Indian history writing or Indian scholarship of the ancient period may not have had the characteristics of the classical histories of Europe, Greece or China, but it would be also incorrect to state that they completely lacked a sense of history. Okay? That is how we can approach this particular answer. Now, let us look at the answer. The notion that Indians lacked a sense of historiography is a contentious one, it is a debated one, rooted in differing definitions of what constitutes historical writing. Early colonial historians such as V.A. Smith and H.H. Wilson described the Indian society as a static society that registered no historical change and therefore it had no use of recording the past. Okay? So, Oriental despotism, changeless society. Criticizing the decadent Indian intellectual tradition, Al-Biruni said that it lacked the necessary curiosity required for historical analysis and every query resulted in storytelling. Similarly, Muhammad Habib considers history writing to be a grand contribution of Islam to Indian culture. Romila Thapar has countered by trying to define the sense of history. It is in fact the consciousness of past events presented in an organized framework. But what event is considered relevant varies from one society to another, and the forms in which they are presented also vary from one society to another. It is not necessary that the document must be a purely historical document by Western standards. If there is one significant element of history, it is time, and ancient Indians were well aware of it. They followed both the cyclic and linear systems of time. Therefore, it is true that ancient India did not develop historiography in the same manner as ancient Greece or China. It is incorrect to say that ancient Indians entirely lacked a sense of history. There are many sources that reflect the historical consciousness of ancient India. Then we go on to enlist these sources. Literary sources such as Danasutis, Gathas, Akhyans, Purans, Itihas, inscriptions and biographies, oral and bardic traditions, and the royal archives and records. Then we address the contribution of Islam. The arrival of Islam did bring new, more systematic and analytical methods of historiography with a focus on chronological and factual recording. However, these elements were not entirely missing in the Indian tradition before this. Kalhana's Raj Tarangini reflected a mature sense of history and indicated a rich tradition of systematic historiography, with similar works likely lost over time. Then finally, the conclusion. Ancient Indian historical expression included genealogies, mythological narratives, royal eulogies and inscriptions. Although these do not align with modern Western standards, they do reflect a historical consciousness. Indian historiography blended myth and history, differing from later Islamic and Western methods, but still demonstrating a distinct sense of historiography. Okay? So, all the arguments that we wanted to make, we have made in this answer. आगे बढ़े. Next question. Foreign accounts as a source of ancient Indian historiography may have some advantages but also have a few shortcomings. Citing appropriate examples, examine the statement. काफी straightforward सा question है. The demand is to do what? Analyze the historical utility of foreign sources by taking an account of their strengths and weaknesses, which need to be demonstrated with the help of examples. ठीक है, शुरुआत कैसे कर सकते हैं? हाउ कैन वी स्टार्ट दिस आंसर? बताइए. ठीक है, इंडिया हैज ऑलवेज बीन अ लैंड दैट हैज अट्रैक्टेड फॉरेनर्स इन large numbers. They came as pilgrims, travelers, explorers, invaders, etc. And many of them have left a deep imprint on Indian history by recording their travels. Okay? So, India has always been a magnet for foreign travelers. Okay? That is the sentiment that you should try to convey in the introduction. They have left behind a rich record of their travelogues. Then what should be our next order of business? Talk about the strengths or weaknesses. Strengths. बताइए क्या क्या हो सकता है? ठीक है, ओके, और क्या? अच्छा. पहले शॉर्टकमिंग्स बताएं. मतलब they considered significant, they highlighted that information. So एक second, so you are saying that the kind of information that was not mentioned by the Indian scholars may have been recorded by them, thus providing a more complete picture of the Indian. ठीक है, that is a valid argument. And Indian history writing or Indian intellectual tradition was an elite tradition जो कि या तो कोर्ट कल्चर से या फिर टेम्पल से रिलेटेड. ठीक है, तो वही चीज़ आप भी बोल रहे हो, दैट सेम क्रिटिकल अप्रोच यू आर टेकिंग. राइट. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी कैन मेंशन दैट दे हैड अ यूनिक पर्सपेक्टिव. ये बोल सकते हैं हम. They focused upon aspect of Indian life that were usually overlooked by Indian scholars, such as the life of the ordinary people, etc., or trade, items of trade, diplomatic relations, right? These kinds of things were overlooked by the Indian scholars and they wrote extensively about this, thus presenting a more complete picture of Indian past. What else? अच्छा, कोई example दे सकते हो यहाँ पर? Because we need to cite examples. Chinese account on the life of untouchables. For example, Payan and the Chandalas. Okay. What else? Okay. There are certain periods of Indian history for which indigenous writing is very rare, right? There are various gaps in Indian history, and over here the foreign sources are extremely valuable. They help fill the gaps, chronological gaps in Indian. For example, पोस्ट मॉडर्न पीरियड के ग्रीक सोर्सेज. ठीक है, What else help in corroborating the Indian text? Can you give an example? किसने मेंशन किया है? नहीं, हर्षा Huensang has not recorded it, neither has Banbhat recorded it. That we get to know only from the Aihole inscription. That in fact is a weakness of foreign sources. They may be corroborated by the inscription, but the political information regarding Harsha's empire provided by Huensang is still considered to be quite suspect. Kyun? Because rulers such as Dhruv Bhatta, Bhaskar Varman, the ruler of Kashmir, etc., they were described as underlings of Harshvardhan by Huensang, those who paid tribute to Harshvardhan, whereas there are no inscriptions attributed to Harshvardhan in any of their territories. In fact, there is contrasting information provided by other contemporary literature that these areas were never controlled by Harshvardhan directly. Okay? They may have entered into a matrimonial or a martial alliance, a military alliance with Harshvardhan, but they were never subjugated by Harshvardhan. So once again, यहाँ पे वो वाला एग्जाम्पल हम नहीं ले सकते हैं. क्या और ले सकते हैं? हाँ, ठीक है, गुड. It can also be a weakness. There are several inconsistencies between the Arthashastra and the Indica of Megasthenes, but there are several things that they share in common. So we can eliminate a lot of you can say suspect information by comparing the two of them. Okay. So yes. Yes, that is not debatable. वहाँ पे in fact Periplus of the Erythraean Sea is also similarly important. Complements history writing, for example. Yeah, Avesta was not the record of a foreign traveler. It was a native Persian text, religious text था. जैसे इंडिया में ऋग्वेद, वैसे उनका ज़ेंड अवेस्ता था. अरे, do these foreign travelers record the occurrence of important events, historical events or not? Yes. For example, the Anabasis of Alexander by Arrian gives a detailed account on the basis of the writings of scholars such as Anacicrates, Aristobulus and Nearchus about the Alexandrian campaign. In Punjab. Does any Indian source talk about this? No. And this is of special significance. Why? Because the invasion of Alexander becomes the reference point from which the whole of ancient Indian history can be unfolded. Okay? So it is 3 years after Alexander's invasion of Punjab that Chandragupta Maurya was finally able to supplant Dhanananda and establish the Mauryan Empire. Date of Alexander's invasion 326 to 324 BC. चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य ने कब एस्टैब्लिश किया? 321 BC. इधर 324 और 321 BC. दैट इज वाई ये डेट यहाँ पर फिक्स हो सकती है. Had it not been for this particular record, would we have been able to affix such an accurate date? Probably not. तो important historical events के बारे में information. Fifthly, we also get to know about the visit of these foreign travelers to Indian sites of pilgrimage and monuments. They describe the architectural style, the construction method in detail. For example, Huensang writes an effusive record of his stay at Nalanda. He also talks very passionately about the caves at Ajanta and the beautiful paintings that can be found over there. These foreign records also give us insights into India's foreign contact and the cultural diffusion that was taking place through it. For example, the records of the Chinese travelers, Fahin, Huensang, Yijin, etc. They came to India primarily as pilgrims and they went back with a large collection of Buddhist scriptures and scrolls with the purpose of spreading Buddhism in their native land. Okay? These foreign sources also talk about Indian geography. For example, जैसे आपने बताया कि Pliny's natural history or Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, the Greco-Roman sources not only provide details about India's trade relationship with the West, but also talk about the different geographical regions of India, important cities, the craft that they were important for, these kinds of things they talk about. Further, और क्या importance हो सकता है? ठीक है. For example, the Indica of Megasthenes talks about these things. What else? ठीक है, तो that I think we have addressed with the first one, ना, unique perspective. कई सारी चीज़ों के बारे में बात करते हैं. Broad based, more comprehensive picture. What else apart from this, foreign writers का क्या advantage होता है? That they are more likely to be biased or more likely to be free of bias, more objective, more objective. This does not mean that their history writing is entirely objective or entirely free of bias, but they do not suffer from the traditional bias of Indian scholars. ठीक है? Right? तो ये तो हो गए some of the advantages. Now some of the disadvantages. Travelers by nature are tourists. They belong to foreign cultures who visit distant lands for short periods of time and try to absorb as much of it as possible in that short period of time. Do you think that they are always going to get an accurate picture, or are they going to make some miscalculations, misinterpretations? misinterpretations. Misinterpretations due to the practical limitations of time and the large breadth of subjects that they cover. Yes, there is a language barrier that must be overcome, right? So, since Chinese or Arabic or Persian or Greek are very distinct from the ancient Indian languages, many observations with regards to India were lost in translation at the first level of interpretation. When the foreign travelers were interacting with Indians and trying to understand the actual mechanism with which India worked, then they tried to write it down in their own native languages. So, second degree of filtration took place, and then third degree of filtration, the modern scholars who are relying upon these ancient Chinese or Greek or Arabic sources to reinterpret them in modern languages such as English or Hindi or French or German. So, third layer of interpretation is needed. So, several things are lost in translation as well. Then these scholars came with their own cultural preferences or cultural lenses, and distinct but similar practices in India that they must have observed in their native lands. क्या बोला होगा उन्होंने, अरे ये तो हमारे घर जैसा है, right? And they may have made misinterpretation. For example, इंडियंस वर्शिपिंग जीएस तो नहीं, उसने नहीं बोला है ये, इंडिका का आप एग्जाम्पल ले सकते हो. इंडिका में ही हैज सेड दैट इंडियन सोसाइटी वाज नॉट बेस्ड ऑन एनी कास्ट और वर्ना सिस्टम, रादर इट वाज डिवाइडेड इनटू 7 क्लासेस. ठीक है. सो व्हाई? बिकॉज ग्रीक सोसाइटी वाज डिवाइडेड ऑन द क्लास बेसिस. ही सेड दैट देयरफॉर इंडियन सोसाइटी वाज आल्सो डिवाइडेड ऑन द क्लास बेसिस. What was the role that these foreign travelers were performing with respect to the audience that they had back home? Yes. For both of these civilizations, for both Greece as well as China, India represented an exotic land, a land of fables, a land of mythology, a land of mystery. Do you think that they are going to demystify India? No, because that is going to desensationalize their narrative. It is going to reduce the historic or the popular, you can say, appeal of their works for their native audience. In fact, they would try to sensationalize India for their own native audiences even more. Therefore, they are going to lie about some things, exaggerate some observations. They are going to embellish some observations, etc. Okay? So, there was a tendency of sensationalization of history writing. We can see this both in the writings of Megasthenes as well as Huensang. Huensang has written an extremely sensational account about Nalanda, the premier institute of Buddhist learning and also his alma mater. Similarly, he has given undue praise to Harshvardhan simply because he was a great patron of Mahayana Buddhism. Megasthenes had talked about things such as gold digging ants or man with goat heads, right? So these kinds of things he has talked about. Then these foreign travelers were also sometimes patronized by Indian rulers such as Sang. Therefore, he has given an extremely flattering account of Harshvardhan. Further, other biases such as a distinct religious bias is visible in the writings of certain other scholars such as Sang once again. Okay. तो ये हो गए disadvantages. Now the conclusion क्या होना चाहिए? Important तो थे, their importance cannot be undermined, but you need to add a note of caution. क्या? हाँ, so blind interpretation या फिर blind reliance on foreign resources should not be there. Like any other historical source, they must be appraised critically. A comparative exercise must be undertaken, and the historian must analyze these sources with a critical eye, thus trying to maximize the utility of these sources. Okay? That is the second question. Let us look at the answer. Foreign travelers' accounts are invaluable for understanding ancient Indian history, providing unique perspectives on various aspects of Indian civilization. Here are key reasons why these accounts are important. Number one, cross-cultural interaction. Foreign accounts depict interactions between Indian society and the outside world, offering insights into trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. For instance, the Chinese traveler Fahian's observations during the Gupta Empire shed light on Indian customs and Buddhist communities. Descriptions of historical events. Travelers often describe significant historical events not found in local records such as royal courts, battles, and political developments. Aryan's Anabasis of Alexander details Alexander's campaigns in India, enriching our understanding of that period. Documentation of monuments and archaeological sites. Travelers recorded their visits to ancient monuments, providing details on architectural styles and artistic traditions. Chinese traveler Sang's descriptions of the Ajanta and Ellora caves enhance our knowledge of these sites. Exploration of geographical knowledge. Accounts include descriptions of Indian geography and natural features, aiding in reconstruction of historical religions. For example, Periplus of the Erythraean Sea provides extensive details about Indian ports, cities, and trade. Linguistic and literary references. Many travelers documented encounters with Indian languages and literature. For example, Al-Biruni has talked about both Sanskrit and Prakrit and important texts such as the Vedas, the Upanishads, the various works on astronomy, mathematics, etc. Historical accuracy and objectivity. While these accounts may contain biases, they often provide fresh independent viewpoints. Megasthenes as an outsider offers an objective perspective on history writing, such as his reliable accounts of the Mauryan Empire, and supplementing local historical sources. Foreign accounts complement local sources, offering a broader view of history. The Indica enhances our understanding of when compared with indigenous records like the Arthashastra and Ashokan inscriptions. And finally, accounts of foreign travelers such as Megasthenes, Fahin, Huensang, Al-Biruni, Ibn Battuta, etc. are very useful for learning about India's past, especially for periods when indigenous records are sparse. फिर उसके बाद second portion of your answer starts. However, such travelogues must be treated with a critical eye before they are accepted. Foreign travelers interacted with alien cultures for short periods of time, thus their understanding is bound to be limited. Example, Megasthenes' misinterpretation of slavery in India. क्या बोला इसने? Slavery does not exist in India. Arthashastra informs us that it did. Ashokan inscriptions also inform us that slavery was rampant. Prominent travelers were sometimes patronized by native rulers, thus they tended to write in a flattering manner about them and their countries. Example, Huensang and Harshvardhan. They perceive these lands and societies through their own cultural lenses, which may lead to misinterpretation of certain observations. Example, Megasthenes' analysis of Indian society that he divided into 7 classes. Finally, the travelers were composing their records for consumption by their own countrymen. The language and expression used was such that sometimes the true meaning was lost in translation. These accounts often have a tendency to lend themselves to some degree of storytelling and embellishment, which warrants careful analysis by historians. Example, Huensang's fantastical description of Nalanda. क्या बताया इसने? That 80 foot का silver spire है over the highest building in Nalanda, that there is an 150 foot copper statue, that the entry into the main premises is restricted, and the guard has asks philosophical questions which a prospective entrant would have to answer in order to gain entry. These kinds of things were said by him, right? So these are the shortcomings. Therefore, while foreign travelers' accounts must be critically analyzed and corroborated with other sources, their contribution to ancient Indian history is significant, enriching our understanding with a global perspective. Okay? That would be our conclusion. आगे बढ़े. Next question. Archaeology offers comprehensive insight into the past and is indeed a valuable source of history. Illustrate. What do we need to do over here? ठीक है. We need to highlight the value of archaeology for recreating a comprehensive or complete picture of the past. What do we mean by recreating a complete picture of the past? That we should be able to recreate any periods, political, administrative, economic, social and cultural history. On the basis of archaeological sources, such as coins or inscriptions or settlements or fossils or monuments or various kinds of artifacts, grave cultures, grave mounds, etc. Right? तो हमें इस आंसर में यही करना है that for as many of these as possible we must cite examples from these kinds of fossils. So how can artifacts help in the recreation of political history? How can fossils, monuments, settlements, coins, etc. throw light on different aspects of political history, administrative history, economic history, social history and cultural history, etc. Okay? Obviously, we will not be able to cite examples from each and every one of them. तो 30-40 तो example हो जाएंगे. So we will have to be selective. हमारा method क्या होना चाहिए? Should we try to analyze through each of these and talk about how coins can help either in the recreation of political or economic or cultural history, or should we take this कि political history के लिए अलग अलग तरह के archaeological sources and selectively cite some examples for them. क्या करना चाहिए, ये वाला अप्रोच या ये वाला अप्रोच? सेकेंड केस, ठीक है. सो द बेसिस फॉर अ डायमेंशनल एनालिसिस would be the themes of historical reconstruction, and we are going to selectively cite examples from each of these kinds of sources. ठीक? So that is what we need to do over here. Let us look at one way in which this could be done. Archaeological sources such as coins, inscriptions, settlements, fossils and other artifacts provide a deep and multifaceted understanding of India's political, administrative, economic, social and cultural history. सबसे पहले political history. क्या क्या examples लिए हैं हमने? Coins and inscriptions. That is it. Coins. Territorial extent. How can coins help in determining the territory of a particular dynasty? Their geographical spread. ठीक है. Coins help map the geographical extent and influence of various dynasties. For example, the widespread distribution of Kushan coins indicate their extensive control as well as trade influence. Kushan coins have been found from the whole of North India as well as large parts of Central Asia and some parts of China as well. Biographical details. For example, the Kumar Devi coins of Chandragupta I give information about his marriage to a Lichvi princess. Okay? Coins can offer personal details about the rulers. The marriage of Chandragupta I to a Lichvi princess is known from coins commemorating the event. Royal symbols. For example, Gupta coins, their royal emblem, the Garud is evident. Then the performance of the Ashwamedh sacrifice by prominent Gupta rulers such as Samudragupta and Kumargupta is also evident, right? Coins depicting the Ashwamedh sacrifice by Samudragupta and Kumargupta I highlight significant political and religious events. Political history. From inscriptions, we can get information about historical events as well as royal genealogies. Historical events such as the different battles and conquests by Harshvardhan or Samudragupta, etc. Royal genealogies, once again through the Gupta inscriptions. So, inscriptions such as the Allahabad pillar inscription provide detailed accounts of the conquest and governance of Samudragupta. Royal genealogies, prashastis and other royal inscriptions list genealogies and achievements, although sometimes exaggerated, giving insights into dynastic history. ये हो गया political history through archaeology. Administrative history, here we have cited inscriptions and settlements. So, among inscriptions we can get information about revenue administration and general administration also. Example, inscriptions of Ashoka talk about duties of officials such as Rajukas and Yuktas. He talks about the duties of officials such as Dhamma Mahamatyas. He also talks about the instructions that he has given to those officials in charge of administering rural justice. What are the things that they should be aware of, right? Then revenue systems from the donative inscriptions of the Gupta and post-Gupta period, from copper plate inscriptions such as the Paharpur and Damodar inscriptions in Bengal, we get details of land grants as well as revenue systems. So, what were the different kinds of taxes from land, who was the authority that was going to collect it, who had the right to impose taxes, who had the right to abolish taxes, etc. Which taxes would be collected by which individual or which authority, ये tax को appropriate कौन करेगा, this kind of information we can get from these inscriptions. Administrative orders, edicts and decrees such as those by Ashok outline administrative directives and moral guidelines for governance. Settlements, now the different settlements of the Harappan civilization give us insights into their administrative practices as well. For example, presence of a fortification wall around all the citadels, the presence of a granary. What does all of this tell us? That some central coordinating authority was there which was providing for the centralization of revenue and for defense, that there existed a distinction between the ruled class and the ruling class. Okay? So urban planning, the layout of cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa shows advanced planning and administrative control in the Indus Valley civilization. So political and administrative history we have addressed. Then economic history. Here we cite coins and artifacts, monetary systems and trade indicators from coins. What kind of monetary information do coins give us? First of all, the metals that were in use, the purity of metals, the volume of coins that were in circulation, whether the circulation was more for high value coins or lower value coins, right? Where have they been found? So this can give us insights into trade relationships as well. Analysis of coinage, including the production, circulation and debasement of coins, offers insights into the economic conditions and trade practices. The debasement of Gupta coins suggests economic decline, right? Trade indicators, the presence of Roman coins in India signifies active trade between India and Rome. Artifacts, craftsmanship and trade, this tell us about the technological and material sophistication of the people, the different kinds of metals that they were using, the scientific knowledge and technology that they had access to, right? So pottery, beads, seals reveal the materials used and the extent of trade networks. Harappan seals, for instance, indicate trade with Mesopotamia as well. So this is economic history. Then we come to the social history. Here we talk about inscriptions and fossils along with settlements. So social practices, inscriptions such as Iran inscription give information about the practice of sati. Agrarian relations, one again we can talk about the donative inscriptions, inscriptions recording land grants, right? So these land grants can give us information about the agrarian structure, the different classes involved in cultivation. Land grants and related inscriptions shed light on agrarian relations and the social structure. Fossils and human remains, for example, diet and health can be gleaned from the graves of various periods. Analysis of human remains and fossils reveals information about diet, health and demographic patterns. So rate of child mortality, for example, the average height, whether the people were suffering from chronic malnourishment or not. These kinds of things we can know about. Whether the bodies were deformed due to shortage of food, these kinds of things. Settlements, cultural interactions. The architectural styles and urban designs of ancient settlements reveal cultural influences and interactions. For example, the spread of Buddhist monastic sites indicate the influence of Buddhism across the regions, right? तो ये हो गया social. Cultural भी आप mention कर सकते हो, if you want to. For example, the pillars of the Nataraj temple at Chidambaram they consist of various sculptures of dancers in how many poses? 108 different poses. The pillars also carry an inscription which names and defines different poses. Okay? It also mentions that these poses have been derived from which text? The Natya Shastra. Of Bharat Muni. Thus, this kind of archaeological information can tell us about the development of classical dance forms in ancient India. Okay? Similar information can be gleaned with regards to the development of music from several inscriptions in the Tamil region. So, 7 classical ragas of Carnatic literature, of Carnatic music, they have been mentioned in several inscriptions. Similarly, the development of religion, different cults, various sects, etc., is also evident from archaeology. For example, आजीविका सेक्ट्स के लिए दशरथ और अशोक ने 7 caves बनवाए in Barabar and Nagarjuni hills. The worship of idols became an important practice from the post-modern period onwards. The cult of constructing temples in which idols of gods and goddesses were placed and worshipped regularly became a prominent feature from the Gupta age onwards, right? So, Indian bhakti would emerge as a result. So, this is the kind of cultural information that we can glean from our archaeological sources. ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गया. So, it is beyond doubt that archaeology can help us in the recreation of a comprehensive picture of the past, that we are not disputing. But a note of caution needs to be. Yeah. Yes, it itself is never enough. Archaeology does offer us a comprehensive picture of the past. However, it usually provides an anonymous history, one that sheds light on cultural processes rather than events. So, wider trends of history may become clearer to us through the analysis of archaeology alone. But if we want to develop a step-by-step understanding of the development of history, archaeology needs to be supplemented with literary sources. It may also be misleading at times, offering a distorted image. Kaise? For example, coins, inscriptions, many of them may be destroyed over time, many of them may be moved from the original context in which they were left behind, right? अशोकन पिलर्स को फिरोज शाह तुगलक ने, जहांगीर ने, दोनों ने मूव किया है, डीफेस करते हैं पिलर्स को, राइट? So these kinds of things may present a distorted picture of the past. So it is not always reliable. Thus, it needs to be analyzed carefully and corroborated against other archaeological and literary sources as well. Okay? So this was our section on the sources of ancient Indian history. क्या क्या cover किया है हमने? First of all, the foreign sources we have covered, the archaeological sources we have covered, and सबसे पहला question क्या था? हाँ, the idea of historical sense. जो बाकी themes हैं sources की, we are going to cover in the test. Yep. Exactly कहाँ पे बोल, exactly कहाँ पे, which portion are we talking about over here? In the conclusion. Yeah, because the way in which the question has been framed now, it does not want you to argue against this statement, right? The key word over here, command word over here is illustrate. So through the use of examples, you need to elaborate how archaeology helps in recreating a comprehensive. Had the statement, had the keyword been examined or discussed, then you would have had to present both the pros as well as cons of archaeology as a source. Over there, the section with regards to the critique of archaeological sources would have been much longer. So 60-40 ka division hota. But since that is not the requirement over here, we have simply addressed it in the conclusion portion. See, in these kinds of questions now, without critiquing these sources, the different sources, जो actual essence है इस पूरे chapter का, that you will not be able to encapsulate. That for an actually comprehensive understanding, you cannot rely on a single source or even a single set of sources. For a comprehensive understanding, comprehensive experimentation or analysis of sources. So that element always needs to be present in your answer in one part or the other, probably in the conclusion, but it will depend how much attention or how much space you give to it on the basis of the demands of the question. Right. Now moving to the next portion, that is prehistory. First question from Neolithic age. Question reads, the beginning of food production fundamentally altered the nature of the relationship between man and nature. What were the factors responsible for the beginning of agriculture? What is the key demand of the question over here? Do you have to analyze how the relationship between man and nature was altered with the beginning of agriculture, or do you need to identify the factors responsible? तो attention किसके ऊपर होना चाहिए? Number 1 or number 2 or both? No. यहाँ पे दोनों के ऊपर नहीं करना है. The question is clearly asking you what the factors were for the beginning of agriculture. In fact, this itself is a matter of debate. This particular statement you are going to take as the foundation of your analysis, that the Neolithic age was a revolutionary phase in the human past. Okay? That you have to accept as a truism, and from there you need to analyze that what were the basic factors responsible for bringing about this revolutionary change in the human condition. So in the form of that debate, you need to address this. Clear है? कैसे करोगे? You can begin simply by saying that the Neolithic age was the final stage of the Stone Age. This era primarily revolves around the advent of agriculture, marking the introduction of cereal cultivation and animal domestication, which fundamentally altered the relationship between man and nature. How was the relationship between man and nature fundamentally altered? What was the position of man in his environment? Was he a food consumer or food producer before this? Simply a food consumer dependent upon hunting, gathering activities, right? Therefore, his very survival to a large extent depended upon the elements, right? He was entirely vulnerable, entirely dependent upon nature and his environment to ensure his survival. With the beginning of agriculture and animal domestication, his role in nature changed. From a food consumer, he became a food producer. With the means to manipulate his environment to suit his own needs in a manner in which he had never done so before. Okay? That is why it is considered to be a truly revolutionary development. It is because of this that for the 5 lakh years before the Neolithic age, the pace of historical change, the pace of change of the human condition had been extremely slow, right? Very little had changed in the 5 lakh years, but within 10,000 years after the Neolithic revolution, man reached space. Stone age से space age पहुंचने में केवल 10 साल लगा after the Neolithic age. But Paleolithic to Neolithic age, it is going to take 5 lakh years. That is what is actually revolutionary about it. Do we need to talk about whether it was actually a revolution or not? यहाँ पे हमको नहीं बात करना है. That question may appear in your test. वो एक दूसरा debate है कि actually revolutionary था या नहीं था. If it was, तो to what degree was it revolutionary? क्या limitations थे उसके? और क्या shortcomings हुए इस revolution, that is another debate. Over here we need to focus upon the debate regarding the factors responsible for the beginning of food production by human beings. Naturally, multiple scholars have tried to identify the specific factors that contributed to the beginning of food production. Various theories have been proposed to explain the factors that spurred the rise of food production activity. And then what do we need to do? We need to conduct a survey of these various theories. The first one has been suggested by Vincent Gordon Child. क्या बोला है इन्होंने? That the beginning of food production by human beings, that is cultivation and domestication of animals, was a result of environmental changes. Namely, the climate was becoming warmer and this led to the extinction of the traditional food sources of human beings, such as the big woolly mammals, such as woolly mammoth, woolly bison, woolly rhino, etc. तो जो प्री न्यूलिथिक हंटर गैदरर्स थे वो इन सोर्सेज पे डिपेंडेंट थे, एंड सिंस दे स्टार्टेड टू गो एक्सटिंक्ट एंड एनवायरमेंटल प्रेशर वाज एक्सर्टेड अपॉन ह्यूमन बीइंग्स, दे हैड टू अडैप्ट टू द एनवायरनमेंट and thus they needed to search for new sources of food. This is what actually pushed them towards the domestication of animals and cultivation. किसने argument दिया है ये वाला? Gordon Child ने. So he suggests that environmental changes like the extinction of big prey animals compelled the push towards agriculture. But one may ask why the environmental changes in the Pleistocene age did not lead to such domestication, right? So Pleistocene age, that is the last great ice age, lasting from roughly 2 million years ago right up to the beginning of the Mesolithic age. Okay, so up to 10,000 years ago or so. So इसमें भी there was a marked and gradual warming of the environment. The human habitat environment was constantly changing over time. Many animals and thus the subsistence base of the human beings must also have been undergoing a similar change. So why did food production not begin at any previous stage, and why did it only begin during this stage in the Neolithic age? This is the counter argument against Vincent Gordon Child's arguments. समझ में आया है ये? Then the next scholar who has studied this issue is Braidwood. इन्होंने क्या argue किया है? He argues that domestication was a unique initiative which emerged out of human inquisitiveness and greater understanding of the environment. As the relationship of human beings and their environment, their surroundings deepened, they started to become more and more curious about it, about their habitat. They started to experiment with it, and through the process of trial and error, they came across certain successful experiments which were replicated by them over time and time again, till they became part of the cultural memory of those communities. Okay? So this is what Braidwood has said. क्या बोला है इन्होंने? It is the innate quality of the human mind to be curious about his environment that led to the process of food cultivation, food production. ठीक है? Counter argument क्या है? That there exist several tribal communities even in the present day who have a very deep understanding of their nature, of their surroundings, but still rely upon the non-agricultural method of subsistence, the hunting-gathering method of subsistence. Why do they do this? Because in those communities, there exists a healthy balance between the food supply and the population pressure. Counter argument क्या है? This balance needs to be disturbed in order to provide the push for human beings to undertake cultivation. ठीक है? जब तक ये push नहीं आएगा तब तक hunting gathering phase से बाहर नहीं निकले. That is the counter argument. So, but even in modern times, foraging tribes do not take up agriculture if there is a balance between population pressure and resource availability, no matter how well they know their environment. Okay? So until unless there is a push, there is an imbalance, till then there is not going to be a push towards agriculture. Then third is Binford. क्या आर्ग्यूमेंट करते हैं ये? He suggests that because of the rising sea levels in the Holocene, people were pushed from the coastal areas towards the inland, towards the hinterland. So coastal communities the, if they are forced to migrate towards the hinterland, this is going to increase the population pressure, right? The same area which was earlier accommodating fewer people will now have to accommodate a much larger number of people. The available food resources, they are going to become stressed, competition is going to increase, conflict is going to increase, and thus human beings are going to be forced to search for new sources of food. This would lead them towards domestication of animals and agriculture. But problem क्या है इसमें? In the prehistoric times, what was the human population? Was it an extremely large one? 8.5 billion है, समय भी उतना था? नहीं. It was an extremely small, less than a fraction of the current population. So the argument of population pressure in such a period where the population was already so small, that does not make any sense. This in turn generated population pressure, hence the incentive to look for new methods of food production. But can we talk about population pressure in an era when human population was already so low? That we cannot do. This is the weakness of Binford's argument. Now, there are certain other scholars who have tried to highlight the role of positive feedback system. क्या बोला है इन्होंने? During the Neolithic period, climate became warmer and wetter, right? This aided in the growth of those plant and animal varieties which were suited for domestication, right? Further, the climatic factors, the climatic conditions also provided the you can say optimum conditions for cross breeding of specimens from different species, and this resulted in the emergence of certain specimens, certain species which were more robust and better suited for the changing climate. Human beings were also developing a greater understanding of nature at this point of time. They were observing these natural changes that were taking place and tried to replicate them in an artificial manner. So the work that nature was doing, they tried to do it themselves. Factors like cross fertilization increased the growth of certain plants which attracted the attention of early farming communities. So they learned more, they leaned more and more towards manipulating the growth of plants in their surroundings, which further developed into full scale agriculture. And finally, there is another set of historians who have talked about the positive changes induced by the onset of climate change. The Pleistocene ended and the Holocene began. Temperature became, the climate became warmer, wetter and milder. This was conducive for the growth in population of those plant and animal species which were more suitable for domestication, such as grasses and small mammals such as goats and sheep, antelopes, or smaller antelopes such as deer, etc. So they were better suited for domestication, right? Natural, another kind of climatic factor that may have played its part, the onset of the Holocene epoch meant warmer, wetter and milder climate. So the natural habitat of plants and animals with the potential for domestication expanded. Thus, environmental congeniality rather than pressure paved the way for cultivation. So it was not a push factor rather than a pull factor. So environmental changes, climatic changes were acting as a pull factor for the beginning of agriculture and animal domestication. And conclusion, बताइए क्या होना चाहिए? हाँ, see, the beginning of food production is a complex process which involves several climatic, technological, social, economic, political and even ideological forces. Okay. If we are focusing only upon environment or only upon technology, are we taking a comprehensive and complete view of history or a pinhole view of history? Pinhole view of history. So, the lens through which we are appreciating these changes, that itself is restricted, right, and therefore, all these changes must also be taken into account. Okay. But we should remember that the available archaeological evidence is fairly limited and it is very difficult to understand complex cultural processes like the development of agricultural practices and animal domestication without fully understanding the role of social political institutions. लेकिन on the basis of archaeology Neolithic period का society quality, is it very clear to us? नहीं. So that is the argument that isolating a single causative factor is also problematic, and the greater possibility is that in different regions a combination of the factors mentioned above, they may have acted in unison. Different combinations of factors may have been responsible. So, charting the trajectory of evolution is a better alternative. Perhaps a different set of factors emboldened the early farming communities in the different ecological. Okay? So, that is the argument that we have to clear hai. So, what are the different theories that have been given? कौन scholars हैं? Gordon Child, Braidwood and Binford. Gordon Child ने क्या बोला है? Ecological pressure due to the extinction of big prey animals created ecological pressure. ठीक है? Binford ने Braidwood ने क्या बोला है? The rising sea levels put inland pressure. Binford ने क्या बोला है? सॉरी, हाँ, Binford is sea levels. Braidwood ने क्या बोला है? हाँ, domestication due to better inquisitiveness. Binford is rising sea levels. Other arguments क्या हैं? Positive feedback systems and environmental congeniality rather than environmental pressure. Conclusion, कोई एक single factor responsible नहीं था. Possibly all of them or different combinations of them were responsible for the beginning of food production in different ecological zones and regions. Next, in the form of a question. That is all right, because that is fulfilling the demands of the question, na, exactly, actually, because in such questions what you have to do is you need to critically analyze all these statements. Now it is up to you whether you want to do it at the same time as you are making the argument or in a separate section, right? So I have chosen to do it at the same time because there are several theories involved over it. So it is better to address the critique at the same time as the theories are being expanded. अगर एक theory होता और उसको critique करना होता तो then अलग अलग sections में it would have been better to do, right? क्योंकि यहाँ पे ऐसा है तो ऐसे. Next question, Chalcolithic age का. Critically analyze the transformative effect of the Chalcolithic age on the human condition. What is the demand of the question? We need to analyze the Chalcolithic age as an age of transformation Transformation from what to what? Chalcolithic एज के पहले और उसके बाद क्या आएगा? प्री हिस्ट्री आएगा। के बाद प्रोटो हिस्ट्री आएगा। या फिर हिस्टोरिकल फेज आएगा, दैट इज ईदर द हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन और द वैदिक कल्चर, राइट? So we need to analyze what were the changes taking place during the Chalcolithic age that were responsible for this transformation from prehistory to proto-history, and how to analyze this change by studying the different dimensions through which history of a period can be appreciated. किन dimensions को study करना चाहिए हमें? Should we talk about subsistence? Yes. Should we talk about technology? Yes. Should we talk about secondary economic activities, crafts production? Yes. Should we talk about exchange, trade? Yes. Should we talk about political formation? Yes. Should we talk about the social structure? Yes. Egalitarian to more differentiated, stratified. We talk about the settlement morphology. Yes. Should we talk about cultural connections and homogeneity? Yes. Neolithic culture में are the different communities going to be highly interlinked? No, they are going to be sparsely located and regionally confined, thus resulting in the emergence of extremely distinct cultures with specific qualities, features. Chalcolithic period में the degree of interconnectedness is going to increase and cultural transmission and exchange start taking. Therefore, more elements of homogeneity are going to start emerging. So, ठीक है? अब बताइए कि मैंने डायमेंशंस बता दिए हैं ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ व्हिच दिस एनालिसिस कैन बी डन. टेल मी what happened in the Chalcolithic age with regards to each of these dimensions which resulted in the transformation to proto history. Subsistence pattern में क्या change आएगा? Domestication on a larger scale, agriculture became a uniform feature, use of the plough became prominent, further artificial irrigation along with the use of better crop management such as double cropping, seasonal cropping, these kinds of things are going to increase. Crop diversity going to be greater than the Neolithic or lower than the Neolithic? Greater. Cultivation of cash crops, is it going to become a new feature? Yes. Sugar cane or cotton are going to be cultivated on a large scale. Okay? Yeah, the degree of surplus as compared to the Neolithic age, smaller or higher? Higher, larger surplus. Technology में क्या change? Use of metals is going to start for the first time. Artificial irrigation और क्या? Use of the plough is going to start taking place. Animal manure is going to be used for improving soil fertility. These kinds of change. Crafts production, what do we find? the proliferation of crafts is going to take place, the resource base of the Chalcolithic communities is going to be markedly superior as compared to the Neolithic communities. Different kinds of crafts are going to flourish. For example, painted pottery is going to become a prominent feature of all Chalcolithic cultures. This is going to be the first time in Indian history. Metallurgy, lapidary, cotton textile industry, these are going to emerge as prominent regional crafts of almost all cultures. Trade, exchange is going to be much more pronounced. For example, all the Chalcolithic communities used copper sourced from a single region. कहाँ से? The गणेश्वर जोधपुरा कल्चर, खेतरी माइंड से आते थे सारे के सारे, ठीक है. फर्दर इनाम गांव का पॉटरी हमको कई और जगह से मिलता है. दिस इंडिकेट्स अ हाई डिग्री ऑफ ट्रेड. State formation is indicated by things such as the presence of fortified settlements such as नागड़ा, ईरान, नावदतोली etc. फोर्ट्स अगर बनाए जा रहे हैं तो किले को रूल करने वाला भी कोई होना चाहिए. Somebody must be there to organize the kind of labor that is required for such a social exercise enterprise, right? Then social organization, social differentiation became much more pronounced. What indicates this? कैसे पता लगता है हमें? सेटलमेंट मॉर्फोलॉजी से पता लगता है, काइंड्स ऑफ ड्वेलिंग से पता लगता है. फॉर एग्जांपल, most of the settlements at sites such as Inamgaon and Daimabad, they had a rectangular shape, but there were also a few larger circular huts. Probably these were the huts used by the local chiefs. Further, we also find that Inamgaon में जो western periphery पे घर बने हुए थे, these were like kind of kuli lines. These were much smaller in size and much more poorly made. There was a greater degree of congestion. So these were the houses primarily of artisans, okay, craftsmen. Whereas the houses of richer farmers and animal owners were located in the western region of the settlement. They were of much larger size, they were much better quality and evenly spaced also. So this we can find. Further, जो ग्रेव कल्चर है दैट ऑल्सो गिव्स अस इंफॉर्मेशन अबाउट सोशल डिफरेंशिएशन. रईसों की ग्रेव्स में किस तरह के आर्टिफैक्ट्स मिलेंगे? ज़्यादा मिलेंगे, कम मिलेंगे? ज़्यादा ग्रेव गुड्स मिलेंगे. हायर वैल्यू, लोअर वैल्यू? हायर वैल्यू. सेटलमेंट्स, तो इससे क्या पता लगता है? हाउ प्री हिस्ट्री टू प्रोटो हिस्ट्री. नाउ सेटलमेंट्स वर मच लार्जर इन साइज. नाउ दे वर मच मोर परमानेंट, राइट? And also they depict an urban morphology that is reflective of an expanding population, not a contracting population. Then cultural transmissions, what do we find? Did the different Chalcolithic cultures share some cultural traits? Yeah. Idol worship, worship of the mother goddess, worship of Yoni and Linga worship, animism, nature worship, etc. These were elements that were diffused over time due to trade and commerce. Okay? So this is the argument that we can make. Is our answer going to be complete with this? No. Counter argument भी करना पड़ेगा. क्या? There were limitations to this transformation. For example, human development indicators क्या दिखाते हैं इस पीरियड के? Was the quality of life very good? No, in some respects it was even poorer than the Neolithic age. कैसे? An analysis of the graves shows us that maternal mortality and child mortality was much higher. The analysis of the teeth of the skulls found from these graves also talk about dietary problems. Balanced diet nahi mil raha tha, for example, right? These kinds of things were there. What else? The transition from rural towards urbanization had started, but had proper urbanization emerged? नहीं हुआ था. These sites were still characterized by the presence of primarily rural features. Further, what do we find? Do we find the widespread use of writing? No, writing was absent in most cases. कहीं पे था भी तो वो भी लेट हरप्पन कल्चर के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मिलता है हमको कैलकुलेटिव. What else? और क्या शॉर्टकमिंग हम साइड कर सकते हैं? The level of material sophistication, was it as high as the later Harappan phase? No. Was there homogeneity of the crafts industry? No. In fact, regionalization of the crafts was a feature, right? So it lacked the proper characteristics of a well developed urban culture. Okay? So these are its shortcomings. Now let us look at the answer. During the second millennium BC, distinct regional cultures emerged in the Indian subcontinent, characterized by the use of stone and copper tools. Prominent Chalcolithic cultures in India included Kayat, Savalda, Malwa and Jorwe. You can also mention other ones such as the Kaneshwar Jodhpura culture or the Ahar Banas culture, etc. Now, these cultures brought about significant changes. Now, in our answer, we have not mentioned all the dimensions, but कई सारे हमने mention किए. आपके actual answer में भी यही होगा कि आपके दिमाग में जितने dimensions होंगे, you will not find the opportunity to mention all of them, but you will have to economize your answer. तो 250 words में आपको लिखना होगा और correct time में भी लिखना होगा. You have to pick and choose which ones to mention, which ones to exclude. और क्या आपके पास कोई ऐसी opportunity है which allows you to merge 2 or 3 dimensions together so that in the same point you can cover several dimensions. Try doing that whenever possible as well. Subsistence pattern. Chalcolithic people shifted from hunting and gathering to domestication of animals and cultivation of food grains, employing advanced agricultural techniques such as irrigation, ploughing and crop rotation. They produced wheat, rice, bajra, lentils, black gram, green gram and grass pea. Cotton was also cultivated in the Deccan region. Transformation from prehistoric to protohistoric stage. Settled life began. They established large rural settlements along riverbanks and hills, abandoning their nomadic style. Use of metal began. Copper tools along with stone tools were introduced through knowledge of copper smelting and metallurgy. Fortified settlements emerged. Kayat, Iran, Inamgaon, Navdatoli, Nagra, etc. featured fortified settlements, signifying the initial phase of state formation. Pottery making. तो यहाँ पे देख रहे हो आप कि fortification of settlements को हमने link कर दिया है with state formation. Pottery making. Chalcolithic communities excelled in wheel-turned and handmade pottery. They were the first to employ painted pottery depicting religious beliefs, hunting practices and aesthetic designs. However, despite their advancements, Chalcolithic cultures had limitations such as poor socio-economic development. Burial sites revealed high infant mortality rates indicating limited socio-economic progress. Limited technological knowledge. Access to copper was restricted and their knowledge did not exist to mixing tin with copper to create the bronze alloy, which played a crucial role in the rise of early civilizations such as Egypt, Crete, Harappa and Mesopotamians. So they did not have the technological wherewithal to reach the stage of civilization without certain external inputs. Rural background. Chalcolithic cultures remained predominantly existed in rural settings, lacking urban development and absence of writing. Writing systems were absent and cities were not established. Despite these limitations, the Chalcolithic culture marked a transition from prehistoric to protohistoric times, signifying advancements in agriculture, metallurgy, settlement patterns and artistic expressions. Okay? So that is how we can address this particular answer. एक 5 मिनट का break लेते हैं. After that we'll continue. मैपिंग को कैसे करना है? मैपिंग अभी तक करा नहीं है प्रिपेयर, तो आपको करना क्या है दैट पिकअप एनी रेफरेंस मटेरियल फ्रॉम द मार्केट, उसमें 25-26 थीम्स होंगी। फॉर एग्जांपल आपको एक सेक्शन मिल जाएगा मैपिंग में विद रिगार्ड्स टू प्री हिस्ट्री, और प्री हिस्ट्री में भी पेलियोलिथिक एज, फिर उसके बाद मीजोलिथिक एज, फिर नियोलिथिक एज, उसके बाद अर्ली हरप्पन कल्चर, प्योर हरप्पन कल्चर, लेट हरप्पन, देन PGW साइट्स, OCP साइट्स, लेटर वैदिक कल्चर वाले जो साइट्स हैं, देन महाजनपदा साइट्स, साइट्स विच आर रिलेवेंट फॉर द मौर्यन एम्पायर, साथ साथ साइट्स रिलेवेंट फॉर बुद्धिज्म, इंपॉर्टेंट एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन। इस तरह से अलग अलग थीम्स होंगी उसमें मैप्स में। आपको कुछ नहीं करना है, यू हैव टू टेक अ मैप ऑफ योर ओन, एक पॉलिटिकल मैप लीजिए और उसमें वो साइट्स को प्लॉट करना चाहिए कि कहाँ कहाँ पे है। वॉट यू नीड टू डू इज टू मेमोराइज वन थीम पर डे एंड यू नीड टू डू दिस थ्रू आउट। अभी से लेकर के एंड तक आपको ये करना है। साथ में आपको क्या करना है, जितनी भी साइट्स आप ले रहे हो ना, कंपेयर देम विद द प्रीवियस ईयर्स क्वेश्चन। विल फाइंड जो भी आपको मटेरियल मिलेगा वो करीब 800-900 साइट्स हों ऑन एवरेज, इतनी होती हैं। लेकिन इफ़ यू लुक एट द प्रीवियस ईयर्स क्वेश्चन पेपर, केवल 400 साइट्स ऐसी हैं जो कि बार बार रिपीट हो गई। यू हैव टू गिव मोर अटेंशन टू दोज साइट्स। वो वाली साइट जो कि वहाँ पे नहीं आ रही हैं उसको आप चाहो तो छोड़ भी सकते हो, टाइम इज लेस। एंड स्पेशली फॉर दोज साइट्स विच आर बीइंग रिपीटेड टाइम अगेन, मेक श्योर दैट यू आर एबल टू आइडेंटिफाई देम करेक्टली, ठीक है। और उसके बारे में आपके पास एक शॉर्ट और कंसाइज डिस्क्रिप्शन भी होना जो कि रेलिवेंट होना चाहिए। डिस्क्रिप्शन में लिखना किस चीज़ के बारे में होगा? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल द एग्जैक्ट लोकेशन, इफ़ यू कैन साइड द डिस्ट्रिक्ट लिखो, अगर वो नहीं लिख पाते हो तो रिवर बैंक पे बना हुआ है वो लिखो, वो भी नहीं लिख पाते हो तो कम से कम यहाँ पे स्टेट है वो लिख सकते हो, ठीक है। वो भी नहीं लिख पा रहे हो तो बोल दो साउथ इंडिया, नॉर्थ इंडिया, वेस्ट इंडिया, ईस्ट इंडिया, सेंट्रल इंडिया, उतना दो, उतना हो जाएगा। दूसरी चीज आपको करनी होगी, फॉर एग्जाम्पल क्वेश्चन इज गोइंग टू अपीयर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ अ पेलियोलिथिक साइट और हरप्पन साइट और अ मेजर ट्रेड एम्पोरियम और अ टेराकोटा साइट, इस तरह से आएगा। तो जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट मेंशन है ना वहाँ पे, उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जितना रेलिवेंट इन्फॉर्मेशन है यू हैव टू मेंशन इन्फॉर्मेशन अबाउट दैट फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल। देन अगर आपके 40 वर्ड्स हो गए हैं, 50 वर्ड्स हो गए हैं, यू कैन लेट इट बी। अगर उतनी इन्फॉर्मेशन अगर नहीं है आपके पास, then for example regarding the site of Amravati, if it is asked a prominent Buddhist site, अमरावती स्तूपा का साइट था, नियर बाई लोकेशन पे नागार्जुना कोंडा है, where another stupa and a prominent Buddhist chaitya and vihara was located, then you can mention that Amravati, apart from being a prominent Buddhist site, was one of the second or one of the two capitals of the Satvahanas. It was also known as Dhanyakataka because it was an important center for the cultivation of rice. Located close by was Salihundam, which was a place where rice was traded, so it was a rice emporium. इस तरह की इंफॉर्मेशन, मतलब सेकेंडरी सप्लीमेंट्री इंफॉर्मेशन आप दोनों दें, ठीक है। मेक श्योर कि आपके पास पर्टिकुलरली ऐसी साइट्स के लिए अच्छे डिस्क्रिप्शन हो एंड यू हैव रिवाइज देम टाइम एंड टाइम। फ्रॉम टुडे till your mains examination you have to dedicate at least half an hour to map. अभी आपका जो प्रिपरेटरी स्टेज है उसमें आपको लगेगा करीब आधा घंटा, एक महीना पूरा का पूरा बनाने में। एंड प्लॉट नहीं भी कर रहे हो तो कम से कम आपको डिस्क्रिप्शन लिखने में आधा घंटा लगेगा। एंड देन सेकंड वाला जो स्टेज होगा वहाँ पे आपको कम टाइम लगेगा, प्रॉब्ली 10-15 मिनट्स उसको बार बार रिवाइज करने में। तो अगर आप आधे घंटे देते हो रोज़ के तो 3-4 थीम्स आप रिवाइज कर सकते हो, ठीक है। तो इस तरह से आपको आगे बढ़ना। क्या किसमें फुल लेंथ टेस्ट हम इस वाले टेस्ट में भी करेंगे। आपके एंशियंट के टेस्ट में क्वेश्चन नंबर 1, क्वेश्चन नंबर 5 जो कंपलसरी टेस्ट होता है, कंपलसरी क्वेश्चन होता है, वो दोनों के दोनों मैपिंग वाले होंगे। मेडिवल के टेस्ट में क्वेश्चन नंबर 1, क्वेश्चन नंबर 5 दोनों के दोनों मैपिंग वाले होंगे। 80 साइट्स तो आपकी यहीं पे हो जाएंगी। फिर उसके बाद जो आपका मेंस जो फुल लेंथ टेस्ट होगा एंड में, उसमें क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 पेपर 1 का मैपिंग का होगा। 100 साइट्स तो हम इधर से कवर करने की कोशिश करेंगे। बाकी आप लोगों को कोई और मदद चाहिए होगी तो बताइए, ठीक है। 5-10 मिनट्स का ब्रेक लेते हैं, उसके बाद विल रिकंटिन्यू। कितना बन रहा है आप लोगों का स्कोर? ऑर्डर में Right. Welcome back, guys. Online students, I hope I'm still audible. Good morning, good afternoon, guys. बंगाली वर्जन का बुक लिस्ट यार, बंगाली में मैंने कभी प्रिपरेशन ना करी है ना करवाई है, सो आई एम नॉट familiar कि बंगाली का बुक लिस्ट क्या हो सकता है. आई एम वेरी सॉरी अबाउट दैट. इंग्लिश मीडियम में अगर कोई गाइडेंस चाहिए तो आई एम ऑलवेज देयर टू हेल्प. ईशान, the material for today's lecture is going to be uploaded on the portal, so you can access it over there. And yes, mapping is going to be covered, but only through the tests, right? Not in this section. Classes वाले section में नहीं cover. Right. Now, moving on to the next question. क्या है? In what ways can the megalithic culture be considered a foundational phase of the history of South India? यहाँ पे क्या करना है? Exactly the same thing that we have done in the previous question. क्या? We have to show how the megalithic age was the transitional phase for South Indian history from prehistorical to the, yes, historical age characterized by the संगम एज. सिमिलरली इन्हीं बेसिस पे हमको एनालिसिस भी करना है, राइट. नाउ we can begin by simply providing the chronological context of the megalithic age time period 1500 BC to 300 BC. It refers to the prehistoric era characterized by the construction of megaliths. क्या होते हैं ये? Large stone structures or monuments. This period is also known as the Iron Age, characterized by the beginning of the use of iron, and while other metals were also in use, the most profusely used metal was iron. That is why it is the Iron Age. Witnessed major socio-economic, political and cultural changes that brought the South Indian communities which experienced it on the very brink of civilization, on the very brink of entering the historical phase. These changes include changes to economic life, changes in social organization, changes in settlement pattern and changes in political systems. Okay? So these are the main dimensions that we need to address, and within that sub dimensions. First of all, economic life में क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? Beginning of sedentary life. Traditional belief with regards to the megalithic age was that it consisted of nomadic pastoral communities primarily. But in recent years, the understanding has changed. Yeah, that agriculture had become the mainstay of the economy, at least towards the end of the megalithic age. So megalithic communities lived on a combination of agriculture, hunting, fishing and animal husbandry. So a diverse and balanced subsistence base they possessed. Okay? They had well developed traditions of specialized crafts as well. There existed different kinds of pottery, metallurgy and lapidary, that is bead making techniques existed along with the household cotton textile industry as well. There was development of metallurgy also. Different types of metals were in use such as copper, tins, bronze alloy was also there. Different ways of metallurgical molding were there. For example, casting was also there, molding was also there, lost wax technique was also there. But the metal most profusely used was iron. And iron की molding कैसे करते थे? Was it mold in the form of a cast, or was cast iron simply beaten with other objects? Cast iron was beaten with other objects in order to give it a proper shape. क्या क्या बनता था उससे? Various types of utensils, agricultural implements, weapons, other artifacts, etc. ठीक है? Other tools that would meet. Different sorts of metallurgical techniques were used in the manufacture of metal artifacts. Some of the copper and bronze objects were evidently cast in molds, while others were hammered into shape. Iron objects such as utensils, weapons, carpentry tools and agricultural implements generally outnumbered the objects made of other metals. Okay. Further, the beginning of trade was also witnessed for the first time in South India during the megalithic age only. Some megalithic sites were centers of crafts production linked to networks of exchange. This is suggested by the location of several large megalithic sites on trade routes of the early historical period. Okay? So, the Sangam period witnessed full-fledged development of trade, and along these trade routes what do we find? Some ट्राइबल मेगालिथिक सेटलमेंट्स. तो कुछ संगम सिटीज भी हैं और साथ में बीच में मेगालिथिक सेटलमेंट्स भी हैं. Were these megalithic settlements established after the creation of these trade routes, or did they exist even before these trade routes? They existed before. They were finally connected to each other with the development of urbanization and trade. Inter-regional trade is also suggested by the distribution of non-local items of precious metals and semi-precious metals. So, items which were not locally available have been found from various locations. That means they were brought to there from other regions, right? So, that is why trade was also existent. So, economic changes we have addressed. Social organization. Megalithic period experienced the growth of population. कैसे पता लगता है? The large number of massive burials consisting of various graves. ठीक है? So, as indicated by the presence of extensive burial grounds with numerous graves, some containing the remains of multiple individuals. Growing population means there were significant changes in the labor mechanism. The supply of labor was rising. The availability of a significant labor force is also evident in the construction of megalithic structures and the building of large rubble and earthen mounds for water storage. So, these were public structures, right? These were not built by a single individual or a single family unit, rather they were the products of organized labor, और organized labor के लिए a critical supply of labor चाहिए होता है. अगर वो नहीं होगा तो इस तरह के monuments possible नहीं हो पाएंगे. Megalithic society also exhibited social differentiation. How can we say this? On the basis of the graves primarily. ठीक है? The size, complexity and contents of the burials reflected the social status of the individuals. The higher the status, the more elaborate the burial. Settlement patterns. The megalithic people lived in large villages with sizable populations. The settlements were often fortified with stone walls for protection as well. Their settlement pattern showed a preference for river valleys and basins. Why? Water availability. Why was it useful? For fishing, agriculture, animal husbandry, सबके लिए ज़रूरी था, right? Particularly in areas with black soil and red sandy loam soil. Water availability along with black soil and red sandy loam soil means that this was being used primarily for agriculture. The proximity of burial sites to major water resources away from permanent settlements also suggests village transhumance. मतलब क्या है इसका? Yes, people are moving from place to place. Suppose this is a river, right? एक megalithic settlement है यहाँ पर. Their burial site is going to be located a long distance away, but it is also going to be located close to the water source, meaning people were generally moving between different seasons from one place to the other. This is known as transhumance, and that they were staying in this location for considerable lengths of time as indicated by their proximity to the water resource. Okay? तो ये हो गया settlement patterns. Then political system. The construction of massive megalithic monuments required the mobilization of collective labor, और collective labor को organize करने के लिए कोई organizing power, organizing entity होना चाहिए, indicating the presence of a coordinating power or entity. Sangam literature talks about tribal chiefs such as Perumakan, right? Unka title hota tha Perumakan. This was probably this coordinating entity. The literary texts from the Sangam age mention chiefs referred to as Perumakan who commanded the resources of their clans. What was the kind of relationship between the different tribes and clans? Both conflict as well as cooperation. Through the process of conflict, what happened? Weaker tribes and clans were absorbed and came under the umbrella of stronger tribes. This resulted in the emergence of larger chiefdoms. This process is also reflected in the Sangam literature. The Megalithic period witnessed the coexistence and competition among numerous small chiefdoms. The subjugation of one chief by another contributed to the emergence of larger chiefdoms, which is evident in the Tamil heroic text of the Sangam period. And therefore, the Megalithic age represented the penultimate stage of the to the beginning of historical phase in South India, that is the Sangam age. It prepared the socio-economic and material basis for what? The further growth of agricultural surplus, settled economy, long distance trade, urbanization and state formation. These were the characteristics of the Sangam age. That is the first historical age of the Tamilham, of the Tamil land. And what were the processes responsible for the development of these elements? The changes that were taking place during the Megalithic age. That is why it is referred to as the foundational phase of the historical age of South India. Clear? तो ये हो गया prehistory. Next, Harappan civilization. Question reads, expand upon the debate surrounding the origin of the Harappan civilization. डिमांड स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड है, क्या करना है? डिबेट ऑन हरप्पन origin needs to be expanded, and finally the judgment call needs to be made which of these views is the most valid, which of these theories is the best one. ठीक है, तो broadly the different theories can be divided into three groups: the theory of Aryan origin, theory of foreign origin, and the theory of indigenous origin. Okay. Foreign origin theory is also known as the cultural diffusion theory or the foreign migration theory. Indigenous origin theory is also known as the cultural development theory or the gradual development theory, etc. You need to be familiar with some of the proponents of these ideas as well. So who were the proponents of the Aryan origin theory? No, not colonial historians. Nationalist, early nationalist historians such as S.R. Rao or K. Shastri, etc. Foreign origin theory के लिए colonial historians such as E. Mortimer Wheeler, Gordon, etc. And indigenous origin theory के लिए primarily the Marxist historians, M.R. Mughal, Amlanand Ghosh, etc. Our modus operandi over here should be what? सबसे पहले किसको डिस्कस करना चाहिए? First the Aryan origin theory, followed by the foreign origin theory, and lastly the indigenous origin theory. Yes? Rao. वहाँ पे कुछ गलत लिख गया है क्या? रॉय लिख दिया तो प्लीज करेक्ट कर लीजिएगा, राव है वो। नाउ व्हाई दिस पर्टिकुलर ऑर्डर? कंक्लूजन हमको क्लियर है, क्योंकि क्या इंडिजिनस वाला जो थ्योरी है that appears to be the most valid one. Therefore, it makes sense to first put forward this theory, make arguments against them, and then finally put forward the theory of indigenous origin and see why it is the most plausible one. Okay? So, relative advantages of or relative strengths of indigenous origin theory over these other theories can be best analyzed with this framework. लास्ट में कंक्लूजन में क्या करना चाहिए हमें? We should conclude by saying that on the basis of these arguments, it appears that the Harappan civilization was the work of indigenous agricultural communities who over thousands of years, through the process of cultural exchange and diffusion, through technological development, through social integration, laid the foundations of the mature Harappan phase. However, यहाँ पे भी कुछ limitations हैं and they need to be overcome as well. और उसके लिए क्या करना होगा? Can we do it ourselves? No, वो ऐसे लोगों को ही करना होगा. More historical research is needed. ठीक है? So that is going to be our modus operandi. शुरुआत कैसे कर सकते हैं? The origin of the Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley civilization, has sparked a significant debate amongst historians. Why? You can also mention that. क्यों? Because it was the first phase of urbanization and civilization in India, and it has attracted a great degree of historical attention. Various theories have emerged, each offering a distinct perspective. These theories include the Aryan theory, diffusionist theory, and the indigenous origin theory. Foreign origin theory को diffusionist theory भी बोलते हैं. First of all, the Aryan theory. तो इसको अंडरलाइन मैं करना भूल गया था यहाँ पे, तो कर लीजिएगा. According to the Aryan theory proposed by S.R. Rao, T.R. Ramachandran and K.V. Shastri, underline the names of these. The Harappan civilization was established by the Aryans who were associated with the Vedic culture. Advocates of this theory argue that similarities between the Harappan and Vedic cultures suggest an Aryan influence. Over here, do we need to expand upon these similarities? उसका scope है, time है? नहीं है. But you should be familiar with these similarities. किस तरह की similarities? Primarily religious and cultural similarities, such as the use of similar symbols such as swastika, the painted circle with 4 dots, the fire worship, the worship of snakes, humped bull worship, mother goddess ka cult, etc., fertility cult, animism, these were common to both. However, critics point out significant differences. This is the counter argument between the two cultures, such as the undeciphered Harappan script, differences in subsistence pattern, settlement pattern, and the level of material development. Since we know that this particular theory has been discarded, तो यहाँ पे इसके जो फेवर में फैक्टर्स हैं, फेवर में एलिमेंट्स हैं, उनको एक्सपैंड करने की जरूरत नहीं है. You simply need to talk about why it has been discarded on the basis of differences, and यहाँ पे differences आप जरूर mention कर दीजिए. These disparities challenge the notion of Aryan influence on the Harappan civilization. Secondly, conclusive evidence against Aryan origin theory. Archaeology and DNA studies. क्या पता लगता है? By the time the first Aryans arrived in India, Harappan civilization was well on its way to decline. ठीक है? So further archaeological findings indicate that Aryan culture appeared significantly later than the Harappan decline. Harappan decline का phase period 1900 to 1700 BC in the Indus Valley region, from around 1900 to 1300 BC in other parts of Western India. By this point of time, there were no Aryans in either of these areas. यानी कि हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन के डिक्लाइन के बाद ये इमर्ज होते हैं, पहले थे ही नहीं. दिस इज वन थ्योरी, द आर्यन थ्योरी. नेक्स्ट we have the diffusionist theory, also referred to as the migration theory or the foreign origin theory. It proposes that the Harappan civilization was the result of migration or colonization by people from external regions, particularly Mesopotamia and Sumeria. Then we can also mention those who proposed this theory. So they include colonial historians such as Mortimer Wheeler, D.H. Gordon and E.J.H. Mackay. They argue that urban dwellers from Mesopotamia arrived in the Indus Valley zone, colonized it, settled over here, and over a very short period of time, barely lasting 500 years, they were able to lay the foundations of the mature Harappan phase. Okay? They argue that urban populations from these regions brought their knowledge and skills, contributing to the development of the Indus Valley civilization. However, this theory faces criticism due to fundamental dissimilarities between the Mesopotamian and Harappan civilization in terms of different script, different types of town planning, canal system, use of bronze, religious structures, etc. दोनों में अलग-अलग है. So this theory has also been largely discarded. Thus we come to the third theory. Yeah, indigenous origin theory. The indigenous origin theory, also known as the cultural evolution theory, posits that Harappan civilization had its roots within the Indian subcontinent. बाहर से कोई नहीं आके कर रहा था, neither Aryans nor the Mesopotamians. Historians such as Amlanand Ghosh and Muhammad Rafiq Mughal, along with Walter E. Fairservice, argue that the civilization gradually evolved from the settled farming communities in Balochistan around the 7th millennium BC. If you want, मेहरगढ़ को साइड कर सकते हो. This was the pre-Harappan Neolithic phase. Then मेहरगढ़ से कई लोग they migrated to the upper Indus Valley in places such as Rana Ghundai, Sher Khan Tarkai, Tarkai Kila, Mundi Gak, Nal, Zob, etc. This was also the pre-Harappan Neolithic phase only, but agriculture became much more prominent in their subsistence makeup, right? Why? Because यहाँ पर agriculture was easier. We were in the Indus Valley. Then these communities began migrating to the lower reaches of the Indus. कहाँ पर? In places such as Harappa, और अमरी और कोट दीजी. Resulting in the emergence of a larger surplus, thus creating the space for the emergence of secondary economic activities, because of which trade and crafts production started taking place at a larger scale. Crafts proliferation and specialization started to take place. Trade between the different settlements in the Punjab and Sindh belt started becoming more voluminous and much more regular, right? As a result, the small villages finally transformed into small towns or settlements, which were gradually rising in size. And as they became more sophisticated, the elements of town planning also started to emerge one after the other. This is known as the early Harappan phase. And finally, mature Harappan phase. कब? 2300 to roughly 1900 BC. Typical sites, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa का नाम ले सकते हो. If you want to name some other sites, Rakhi Gadi also, Dholavira also, you can name those also, or Ganeri Wala etc. You can name them. ठीक है. यहाँ पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? That the Harappan civilization was in its full swing and all the urban elements of the civilization were at their peak, including the use of script, the use of burnt bricks, town planning, extensive internal as well as external trade, craft specialization, and the presence of cultural homogeneity across the empire, across the civilization. So these are the things that you can discuss over here. अगर आप mention करना चाहो तो ये कर सकते हो यहाँ पर. There is scope for doing that also. Now they suggest that Harappan civilization emerged through a process of cultural convergence from an early Harappan phase. Cultural convergence का मतलब क्या हुआ? That देखो, एक तो हो गया the Balochistan culture, also known as the Iran Balochi culture or the Mehergarh culture. एक हो गया the Court Dijan culture. एक हो गया चौथी Tiswal culture. What are these? These are diverse, early and pre-Harappan cultures. Each of them is going to have a distinct cultural identifier, unique elements होंगे. For example, a unique feature of the Balochi culture was cotton cultivation, along with the use of a granary, along with the construction of houses on top of a raised platform which was surrounded by a mud fortification wall. So a mud citadel. Court Dijan culture, what were the unique characteristics? The use of burnt bricks and wheel turned painted pottery of a fine variety, the use of steatite seals, etc. चौथी सीसवाल कल्चर से हमें क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? We find the use of peons, shell, bead and ivory works, the use of semi-precious stones, all used in the lapidary industry, that is the bead making industry. Along with that, we find the use of script also. Over time, what is going to happen? Each of these cultures is going to become more and more sophisticated, more and more technologically advanced and more robust. Their agricultural surplus is going to expand and they are going to begin trading with each other. Okay? As they trade with each other, they are going to become economically integrated and after becoming economically integrated, the pace of cultural exchange and diffusion is going to rise, right? And iske saath saath there is going to be some kind of cultural unification of the entire region, resulting in the emergence of a unified Harappan civilization, okay, which by 2300 BC is going to start exhibiting mature characteristics. तो ये होता है क्या? Cultural convergence from an early Harappan. This theory takes into account factors such as craft specialization, technological advancement, favorable environmental conditions, population growth and social integration. तो वही जो पूरा process था, you do not need to mention it separately. In a single line like this, you can talk about it. These elements contributed to the transition from the early to the mature Harappan. And then the conclusion. Among these theories, the indigenous origin theory is widely accepted by historians. However, it is important to acknowledge the limitations of this theory as well. For example, some Harappan sites lack evidence of an early Harappan phase. For example, मोहनजोदारो में एक्सकवेशंस जो हुए वहाँ से कोई अर्ली हरप्पन लेयर मिला है? नहीं मिला है, right? Therefore, it appears that it emerged suddenly out of nowhere. ठीक है? Similarly, the transition from early to mature Harappan levels is not always smooth. At Harappa, do we find an early Harappan layer or not? Yes, मिलता है, but there is a big gap between the early Harappan and mature Harappan layer. तो 250 साल का एक sterile layer है over in which no human remains, no occupational remains have been found. So this means that early Harappan phase में Harappa was inhabited, but then it was deserted and then reoccupied, and it emerged as a fully developed Harappan city with all the elements of mature urbanization. Okay? These are inconsistencies which have yet to be explained. Furthermore, archaeological evidence alone cannot provide a comprehensive understanding of the complex process that led to the rise and development of the Harappan civilization. Why? Because it cannot account for the social, political and ideological forces that were responsible for creating this civilization. Okay? So, any civilization is the result of a combination of different forces. केवल इकोनॉमिक या फिर कल्चरल फोर्सेज इकोनॉमिक या फिर क्लाइमेटिक फोर्सेज रिस्पॉन्सिबल नहीं होते हैं, अदर फोर्सेज आर ऑल्सो रिस्पॉन्सिबल, बट आर्कियोलॉजी अलोन इज नॉट सफिशिएंट फॉर throwing light on that. These kinds of limitations also must be kept in mind, and if you want you can add one line over there that therefore further research is needed to conclusively settle this debate. ठीक है, वही है कि लिखने की जगह नहीं है ना, एंड वी हैव ऑलरेडी सेड कि हम केवल आर्कियोलॉजी के ऊपर डिपेंड कर रहे हैं. स्क्रिप्ट अगर डिसाइफर हो जाती, वी वुड नॉट हैव बीन मेकिंग दिस स्टेटमेंट. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, वंस अगेन डिबेट वाला क्वेश्चन है. क्या? वॉज इट मास्टरी ओवर ट्रेड और मास्टरी ओवर एग्रीकल्चर that acted as the main life force of the Harappan urbanization? ठीक है, क्वेश्चन का डिमांड क्या है? What was the primary factor behind the emergence of Harappan cities? Was it trade or agriculture? ठीक है. Now, this was not part of the traditional debate surrounding the Harappan civilization. ये actually recent debate है. It emerged in the early 2000s with the writings of Shireen Ratnagar. Around 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, she wrote a series of essays which were compiled in the forms of books, which emphasizes upon the role played by trade in facilitating Harappan urbanization. कौन historian है? शिरीन रत्नागर. इन्होंने क्या बोला है? That trade, and that too external trade, played the most important role. It was the main life force behind Harappan cities. As evidence, she cites the presence of large Harappan cities in areas that were not suitable for habitation or cultivation. These were arid and semi-arid zones such as the Makran coast or the Run of Kutch, consisting of prominent cities such as Tuktako, Tutka Gendor and Dholavira. और ये क्या बोला है इन्होंने? That these were trade emporiums which linked the Harappan civilization to the Mesopotamian civilization. And what were they prominent for? They were prominent either for the stone polishing industry or the lapidary industry. So these had well developed industries of high value items. So items made out of, or beads made out of lapis lazuli or carnelian or agate, jasper, etc., they would be exported to the Mesopotamian civilization in large numbers, which explains why these cities, these large cities could be sustained at in such inhospitable climates. Okay? So यहाँ से luxury items का export हो रहा था. He says that these areas were the main engines of economic growth for the rest of the Harappan civilization as well. क्यों? Because of the large scale export of luxury items, there was an influx of a high degree of wealth. इसकी वजह से locally prosperity was very high, and as prosperity increases, demand is also going to increase, which is going to have a knock-on effect on other regions as well. So this created not only agricultural demand but the demand for manufactured goods as well. Therefore, this also induced a secondary urbanization. Okay? And she further goes on to claim that the ultimate decline of the Harappan civilization was in fact caused by the collapse of Mesopotamian trade. Okay? This is the argument that she has made. Counter arguments have been provided by historians such as D.K. Chakrabarti and Jim Schaefer. क्या बोला है इन्होंने? That first of all, Dr. Ratnagar's claims have not been supplemented with sufficient archaeological information. Okay? So they have challenged Shireen Ratnagar on an empirical basis. क्या बोलते हैं? That had this trade been so important, then a large number of Mesopotamian artifacts would have been found in these sites and a large number of Harappan artifacts would have been found in Mesopotamian sites. लेकिन ऐसा होता है नहीं. In fact, in India we find very few Mesopotamian artifacts. Apart from a few seals and a few Mesopotamian weights and stone weights, we do not find anything else. And on this basis, they have suggested that external trade was never very important and at best played a marginal role in Harappan urbanization. ठीक है, तो हरप्पन अर्बनाइजेशन में चौथा चांद लगाने का काम ये करता था, बेसिस ये नहीं देता था. दैट इज द आर्ग्यूमेंट दैट हैज बीन. इनफैक्ट एक्सटर्नल ट्रेड से ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट क्या था? इंटरनल ट्रेड. Internal trade was much more important. Why? ट्रेड करने में किससे फायदा होता है? अमीर आदमी से, गरीब आदमी से? अमीर आदमी से. अमीर आदमी होगा तो आपको 5 रुपए की चीज के लिए 500 रुपए देने के लिए तैयार हो सकता है. गरीब आदमी होगा तो क्या बोलेगा? भैया 5 रुपए का ही ऐसे दे दो यार, राइट? तो these people have said, these scholars have said that in comparison to the Harappan civilization, Mesopotamian civilization में क्या दिख रहा था? Resource surplus or resource crunch? Resource crunch. These were resource deprived areas. Mesopotamia and Sumeria had already entered a long spiral of decline by the time that the Harappan civilization attained maturity. So while Harappan civilization was a rising economic power, Mesopotamia and Sumeria were declining economic powers. And in such a scenario, internal trade was much more important than external trade. Secondly, Harappa or the Harappan civilization had an extensive resource base which could fulfill the demands of the urban population with regards to food as well as raw material, natural resources. So this became the basis for urbanization. Further, they have made the argument that it also had a well developed and specialized craft sector, as a result of which local demand for manufactured items could also be fulfilled locally. बाहर से कुछ import करने की जरूरत नहीं होती. ठीक है? And further, they have gone to argue that this entire network of both internal as well as external trade was actually underpinned on the primary economy, right? Was actually underpinned on the large surplus. The Harappans had advanced agriculture with a large surplus, which freed up the population for getting engaged in secondary economic activities. It also led to an increase in population and increase in the labor supply. So it facilitated urbanization in this manner. Animal husbandry was also playing a major role in supplementing agriculture, which was also supplemented with other you can say subsistence methods such as fishing, hunting, gathering, etc. The using of exploitation of marine resources, aquatic resources, right? Further, the presence of a strong tradition of indigenous crafts also fulfilled the needs of the local economy and had a multiplier effect in facilitating urbanization. These are the arguments that they have made. Conclusion में क्या लिख सकते हैं हम? Urbanization is the result of a simple recipe or complex recipe? Complex recipe में एक ingredient होता है या फिर 100 ingredients होते हैं? 100 ingredients होते हैं. There are multiple ingredients, right? And ये जो debate है, it focuses upon a single ingredient. क्या? The economic factors. Apart from that, there are several other factors which have to be taken into account, such as social, political, ideological, cultural factors, etc., ecological, climatic factors, etc., right? However, this kind of a debate overlooks that, and thus engagement in such a debate itself reflects an oversimplification of history. ठीक है, तो सबसे पहली बात तो हम इस डिबेट को ही क्रिटिक कर रहे हैं कि यही गलत है, ये सही तरीका नहीं है सोचने का. उसके बाद भी वी नीड टू कम टू अ फाइनल जजमेंट कि आउट ऑफ द टू, ट्रेड और एग्रीकल्चर, ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट रोल किसने प्ले किया? एग्रीकल्चर ने प्ले किया. एग्रीकल्चर एक्चुअली प्रोवाइडेड द रियल फाउंडेशंस ऑफ द सोसाइटी, ऑफ द इकोनॉमी, on which the entire superstructure of urbanization was based. So that is what we can conclude. Clear है? Do you need me to go through this या समझ में आ गया है? आगे बढ़ें, आगे बढ़ें, इसको पढ़ लोगे आप लोग? Then finally we have the last question for today. The evidence from mature and late Harappan sites shows a complex interplay of elements of continuity and change. Elaborate. What is the demand over here? We have to show the elements of continuity and change in the characteristics of which age? Mature or late Harappan age? तो वहां से चेंज भी तो हो रहे हैं. फोकस हमारा कहां होना चाहिए, मैच्योर पे या फिर लेट हड़प्पन पर? लेट हड़प्पन पर. ठीक है, क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है हमें? दैट द लेट हड़प्पन एज रिप्रेजेंट्स दी नहीं, फेज आफ्टर डिक्लाइन. ठीक है, पोस्ट हड़प्पन फेज ऑफ द हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन. यहां पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? दैट the characteristics of the mature Harappan phase are disappearing but have not disappeared entirely. Some of them continue to exist. ठीक है, now earlier this phenomena was considered to be a negative development, but now historians tend to stay away from assigning any value to these kinds of developments. पहले क्या बोलते थे? A phase of decay, a phase of decline, a phase of death, a phase of disappearance. But now it is simply seen as a phase of, yes, transformation, a phase of change. पहले कुछ और फीचर्स थे, अब कुछ नए फीचर्स इमर्ज होंगे विद सम कॉन्टिन्यूटी एज वेल, ठीक है। तो वी नीड टू आइडेंटिफाई दैट इन डिफरेंट डायमेंशंस ऑफ हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन क्या चेंज हुआ और क्या कंटिन्यू रहेगा। क्लियर? तो द लेट हरप्पन एज refers to the post-urban phase of the Harappan civilization. It is characterized by the transformation of the mature Harappan civilization. It is characterized by the transformation of the mature Harappan civilization. Large, well-planned cities, extensive trade, a prospering and specialized crafts sector, and the widespread use of script is going to disappear. At the same time, many elements of the mature urban phase would continue as well. And now through different dimensions we need to see ये change and continuity कैसे होगा. Urbanism, pottery culture, seals, trades and craft, etc. agriculture से हमको analyze करना है what were the elements of trade change and continuity. First of all, urbanism. Various elements of Harappan urbanism such as cities, script and seals, specialized crafts and long distance trade declined in the Harappan phase but did not completely disappear. ठीक है, यहाँ पे अब आप examples दे सकते हो. For example, some of the late Harappan sites such as Kudwala in Cholistan, Bed Dwarka in Gujarat and Daimabad in Maharashtra in the upper Godavari valley can be described as urban. So they did have certain urban features, their size, some elements of town planning, etc. They were still visible, but they were very few and far between. Further, the degree of town planning and sophistication was nowhere close to the degree of town planning and sophistication of the mature Harappan. Similarly, although baked bricks and drains are present in the cemetery age occupation at Harappa, while at Sanghol there was a solid mud platform on which mud houses stood, there is not a single city that matches the grandeur and monumentality of Mohenjo-daro. Okay? So once again, some elements of mature Harappan cities are going to be present, but degree of sophistication is going to be much lesser. Similarly, writing is occasionally encountered but remains generally confined to a few potsherds. Mature Harappan phase में writing कहाँ से मिलता था? Pot से मिलता था, various artifacts से मिलता था, seal से मिलता था, signboard से मिलता था, right? Sealing से मिलता था. Over here, only on some of the broken remains of a few pots have a very few specimens of writing been found. Example, graffiti on pottery occurs in Saurashtra and northern Gujarat as well as in the eastern regions. 4 potsherds with Harappan script were found at late Harappan levels at Daimabad. Now, of course, you need not give such extensive examples. ये केवल आपके reference के लिए हैं, so that you can go back home and revise. यहाँ पे आप एक या फिर दो चीजों को cite कर सकते हैं. For example, you can say that cities existed and here baked bricks and drains were also present in cities such as, कुछ examples दे सकते हो. However, they did not match the degree of sophistication and monumentality of great Harappan cities such as Mohenjo-daro. Similarly, writing भी अब बहुत infrequently मिलेगा, rare मिलेगा. Similarly, pottery में compared to mature Harappan pottery, the slip of the late Harappan pottery is less bright. The pots tend to be thicker and sturdier as well. So Harappan period का pottery उसका characteristic क्या है? It is fine, high value, decorative in nature. Late Harappan pottery, people were less concerned with ornamentation, more concerned with utility. It is more utilitarian in nature. Okay? That is why the quality of the outer glaze that is poorer in late Harappan pottery. The fabric of the pots is also thicker and much more sturdier, much more coarse in late Harappan pottery. Similarly, some classic Harappan shapes are going to disappear while other shapes are going to continue. Classic Harappan shapes such as the beaker, goblet, perforated jar, S-shaped jar, pyroform jar, etc. are going to disappear, while other shapes such as jars of different shapes and dish on stand is going to continue. So, in the typological analysis also, there is both change and continuity. Seals, क्या होगा? The usage of seals is going to decline. Seals are going to become much more rarer. Some circular seals appear at Daimabad and Jhukkar, not rectangular like the typical Indus specimens. Rectangular seals without any motifs, that means without any inscriptions, were found at Dholavira in the post-urban phase, in the late Harappan phase. A rectangular conch shell seal with the motif of a three-headed animal similar to the seals found in the Persian Gulf was found at Bet Dwarka. This also indicates that foreign contact had continued even during the late Harappan age. In the field of trade and crafts, a few craft traditions survived the urban collapse and are found in the makeup of the late or post Harappan mosaic. One of those crafts is the creation of faience. Faience क्या होता है? ग्लास लाइक मेटल होता है जिसमें ओपेक इंक से डिजाइन्स बनाए जाते हैं, ठीक है. ग्लास ग्लेज्ड अर्थनवेयर डेकोरेटेड विद ओपेक कलर्स वाज वन सच क्राफ्ट. कहाँ से मिलता है? इन पंजाब एंड हरियाणा देयर आर फेयंस, ऑर्नामेंट्स, बीड्स ऑफ सेमी प्रेशियस स्टोन्स, टेरिकोटा कार्ड फ्रेम्स, kilns and fire altars. So faience is going to continue. A continuity can also be seen in the character of meta technology, although there was a general decrease in the use of copper. Okay? So amount of copper objects is going to decline, but technological sophistication is going to remain high. Bronzes from Daimabad and Maharashtra made by the lost wax process. This was the same process with which the dancing girl had been made. Now, one distinct feature of the late Harappan phase was that instead of the cultural cohesion that was exhibited by the mature Harappan phase, यहाँ पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? Regionalization of the crafts. Every region is going to have its own craft tradition. For example, the metallurgical tradition, the pottery tradition of places such as Inamgaon or Malwa, they are going to be very different. There was no cultural cohesion or artifactual uniformity of the kind that was a hallmark of the mature civilization. Instead, the crafts tradition became regionalized in nature. In agriculture, what do we see? Some improvements become visible. Yeah, a notable development in the late Harappan phase was the diversification of agriculture. As the Harappan people migrated into new ecological zones, they started cultivating new crops. Why? Because they started coming into contact with the native Chalcolithic communities which were already inhabiting these regions and already cultivating these crops. At Perak in Balochistan, there was the beginning of double cropping also. So new techniques or new technology is also going to be adopted by them. Wheat and barley were being grown as winter crops and rice with irrigation, millets and sorghum as summer crops. Did the Harappans practice this kind of double cropping, seasonal cropping? No, they cultivated both Rabi and Kharif crops, but throughout the year. केवल एक ही crop obtain करते थे वो, ठीक है? So both wheat and rice, wheat and sorghum, millets, they used to cultivate simultaneously. In the Kutchi plains, there are fairly large settlements growing a variety of crops supplemented with irrigation. Kutchi plains वही Balochistan वाले region. Rice and millets were found at late Harappan levels at Harappa as well. So agriculture में what do we find? Greater sophistication is there. Why? Because of cultural diffusion. New interactions. तो यानी कि these communities are going to spread and they are going to intermingle with other Chalcolithic cultures. And फिर उसके बाद बाहर से भी कुछ cultures आएंगे, PGW culture, OCP culture, उनसे भी intermingle हो जाएंगे. And they are going to impart those characteristics that they have learned from the native cultures as well as the Harappan civilization. So because they are the repositories of the cultural memory of great Harappa to the newcomers. तो OCP और PGW cultures को भी ये impart कर देंगे. And as a result क्या होगा? These late Harappan cultures became the common link between great Harappa and the Vedic culture, and following the Vedic culture, the second urbanization. So second urbanization was undertaken by a coalition of people, right? हम ट्रेडिशनली ये बिलीव करते थे दैट सेकेंड अर्बनाइजेशन किन लोगों ने किया, आर्यंस ने किया, बट ऐसा एग्जैक्टली करेक्ट नहीं है. Second urbanization from 600 BCE onwards was actually facilitated by the socio-economic, political and cultural contributions of various groups such as the Aryans, who spread across North India between the Rig and later Vedic ages to different cultures such as the PGW culture, primarily located in the western portion of North India. मतलब जो political India है उसका western portion, western UP वाला, हरियाणा वाला area, eastern पंजाब वाला area. The symmetry H culture, western Punjab wala area. The Gandhar grave culture, ये northern Punjab wala area. And the OCP culture. OCP culture ये eastern India, mid Ganga valley wala area. Along with the late Harappans, who by this point of time had become completely enmeshed with these cultures as well as the other native Chalcolithic cultures of central India and the Deccan region. Now, the late Harappan cultures borrowed some elements from the great Harappan civilization, the great Harappan, mature Harappan phase, some elements from the native Chalcolithic cultures, and themselves came under the domination of the social and political machinery established by the new dominant culture across North India, that is the Aryan culture. Okay? And it was under the aegis of the remnants or the descendants of the Aryan tradition that second urbanization took place. But यहाँ पे केवल अगर Aryans होते, without these other cultural contributions, would they have been able to attain the stage of second urbanization? Maybe they would have, but इतना जल्दी नहीं हो पाता. Would have taken an extremely long time. So, एक मिनट. Neolithic से लेकर के mature Harappan phase, it took roughly 5,000 years, and Rig Vedic age to second urbanization, this took only 900 years, 1500 to 600 BCE. Okay? What explains this gap or this difference? It was the cultural memory of great Harappa and the technological sophistication of the Chalcolithic cultures transmitted to the Aryan civilization through cultural assimilation and transmission that accelerated the process of urbanization. From nomadic, they went to a fully developed urban civilization in a matter of 900 years. Okay? अकेले probably नहीं कर पाते. And this is the same kind of sentiment that you need to elicit towards the end of your answer, in the conclusion. The late Harappan communities ultimately merged into the surrounding agricultural groups such as the PGW culture and the OCP culture. Through the process of cultural diffusion and exchange, certain Harappan elements were transmitted into the successor cultures of these cultures. This explains the remarkable continuity of Indian culture right from the Harappan age to the present. Okay? Because second urbanization was shaped by the Aryan culture, Aryan tradition, which itself was receiving inputs from the great Harappan through the late Harappan. That is why an unbroken link of continuity exists from the Harappan period up to the present day. Okay? So, present day Indian society and culture is actually a descendant of Aryan culture. Okay? But since Aryan culture itself was being informed by the Harappan culture through the late Harappan sites, therefore continuity हम Harappan culture से directly trace कर सकते हैं. Alright, so that is the argument that we can. समझ में आया है? Now, with regards to change and continuity of the Harappan civilization, कुछ और तरह से भी discussions हो सकते हैं. We will try to do that in our exam. ठीक है, पहले टेस्ट में करने की कोशिश करते हैं. तो दूसरे एंगल से चेंज को, कॉन्टिन्यूटी को अप्रिशिएट करेंगे उसमें. क्लियर है? तो 3 टॉपिक्स वी हैव कवर्ड, इनफैक्ट इफेक्टिवली 4 टॉपिक्स वी हैव कवर्ड टुडे. मेगालिथिक भी कवर हो गया है हमारा. एंड टुमारो फ्रॉम द वैदिक टू द पोस्ट मॉडर्न फेज हम कंप्लीट करने की कोशिश करते हैं. वंस अगेन 9, 10, 12 क्वेश्चन जितने भी होते हैं उसमें. ठीक है, पैटर्न ऑफ द क्लासेस इज गोइंग टू रिमेन द सेम. क्वेश्चन आंसर फॉर्म में ही होगा. मोस्ट ऑफ द थीम्स वी आर गोइंग टू कवर थ्रू द क्रैश कोर्स. सम थीम्स वी आर गोइंग टू कवर एक्सक्लूसिवली थ्रू द टेस्ट सीरीज. हाँ, उसमें भी ऐसे डिस्कशन होंगे, लेकिन उसमें डिस्कशन ना इतने लंबे नहीं होंगे. उसमें आई विल इनवाइट क्वेरीज फ्रॉम यू, क्योंकि 18-20 क्वेश्चंस डिस्कस करने में काफ़ी टाइम लग जाएगा. आपके पास भी टाइम कम है. नहीं, फुल लेंथ टेस्ट होंगे. क्वेश्चन 1 और क्वेश्चन 5 दोनों में मैप वाला होगा. तो हमारे पास बचते कितने हैं? 6 क्वेश्चंस बचते हैं, 3-3 पार्ट्स ईच. 18 क्वेश्चंस होंगे. 18 क्वेश्चंस हमको सब्जेक्टिव वाले डिस्कस करने होंगे. राइट? अब उसमें आप लोगों को जिसमें डाउट हो रहा है, यू गाइज कैन कम एंड आस्क मी कि यहाँ पे क्या होना चाहिए, आपने क्या लिखा हुआ है, गलती क्या है. वी कैन डिस्कस लाइक दैट ऑल्सो. और इफ़ यू गाइज वांट कि अगर किसी टॉपिक में बिल्कुल भी नहीं समझ में आ रहा है, यू कैन लेट मी नो, आई विल एक्सपैंड अपॉन दैट. ठीक है, तो उसको भी हम लोग कोशिश करेंगे कि मैक्सिमम 4 घंटे में पूरा डिस्कशन कंप्लीट करने की कोशिश करें. बिकॉज अननेसेसरली अगर 8-10 घंटे का डिस्कशन हो रहा है तो इट डज नॉट मेक एनी सेंस. ठीक है, चलिए देन शैल वी एंड दिस लेक्चर. हाँ, see, you already have your टाइम टेबल ना, कि कौन से टेस्ट में क्या आने वाला है. मेक श्योर दैट इन द कमिंग 2 वीक्स यू हैव कंप्लीटेड द होल ऑफ योर एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री. कमिंग 2 वीक्स क्या, अब तो एक ही हफ्ता बचा, अगले हफ्ते तो टेस्ट ही होने वाला है. राइट? एंड इफ़ यू कीप फॉलोइंग दिस ना, तो आपका अभी एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री एक बार नहीं 2 बार रिवाइज होगा. कि अभी एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री होगा, फिर उसके बाद मिडिवल हिस्ट्री होगा, फिर उसके बाद एक फुल लेंथ टेस्ट होगा पेपर 1 का, फिर उसके बाद मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री होगा, फिर वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री होगा, फिर उसके बाद एक फुल लेंथ टेस्ट होगा पेपर 2 का. तो 2 बार ऐसे रिवाइज होगा. फिर उसके बाद आपको 1 हफ्ता और मिलेगा बीच में रिवाइज करने के लिए, जहाँ पे आप पूरा का पूरा हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल रिवाइज करोगे. तो माय एडवाइस टू यू इज़ कि गो बैक होम, look at the previous year's questions, look at the notes that you have prepared, identify those areas जहाँ से आपके questions नहीं address हो पा रहे हैं, जहाँ पे आपको अभी दिक्कत हो रही है. ठीक है, जो बहुत पुराने वाले टाइप के क्वेश्चंस हैं उनको रहने देना, वो वैसे वाले क्वेश्चंस नहीं आते हैं. आई एम श्योर यू विल बी एबल टू डिसर्न कि किस तरह के क्वेश्चंस आपके लिए रेलिवेंट है। या पिछले 5 साल 10 साल के करो, 2013 से लेकर के 2023 तक के करो, दैट वुड बी मोर देन इनफ। फिर उसके बाद अगर और ज़्यादा स्पेस बचता है, आपके पास टाइम बचता है, देन गो बैक बियॉन्ड दैट। तो आइडियली तो आपको एनालाइज करने चाहिए जब से हो रहा है, मतलब 1970s से, जब से अवेलेबल है, 79 से शायद अवेलेबल है, तो तब से करना चाहिए, बट प्रैक्टिकली करना थोड़ा मुश्किल हो जाएगा, राइट। यू विल फाइंड दैट क्वेश्चन हो सकता है एकदम सेम ना हो, लेकिन थीम्स ऑन विच क्वेश्चंस आर बेस्ड ना, तो हड़प्पा में भी 5-6 ही ऐसी थीम्स होंगी जहां से क्वेश्चन आते हैं बार बार। क्या डिक्लाइन कैसे हुआ है वो वाला बचा है, फिर उसके बाद हमारा बचा है नेचर ऑफ द पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम, उसके ऊपर डिबेट है, वो वाला बचा हुआ है। फिर उसके बाद हाँ बेरियल सिस्टम्स, वो पुराने टाइप के क्वेश्चंस हो गए। बेरियल सिस्टम्स के थ्रू क्या दिखाना है, सोसाइटी दिखाना है, इकोनॉमी दिखाना है, ये सारी चीज़ें, राइट। वो एक थीम हो सकता है, बट वही है, 3 थीम्स हमने कवर कर लिए हैं, 2-3 थीम्स और बचे हुए हैं। क्वेश्चंस आप उठा करके देखोगे तो मेनली ब्रॉड यही थीम्स होती है आपकी, ठीक है। तो हम कोशिश करेंगे कि जो हमारी थीम्स रह गई हैं वो हम अब अपने टेस्ट से भी कवर करने की कोशिश। हाँ PYQ, और आप लोग मेरा नंबर ले लो। हाँ ये तो YouTube पे जाएगा। अभी रुक जाओ, YouTube लाइव एंड कर देना, तो उसके बाद देता हूँ मैं। राइट हाँ तो कोई बात नहीं, ठीक है। राइट तो अभी नंबर ले लेना, यू कैन गेट इन टच विद मी। ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स, इफ यू वांट माय नंबर, गेट इन टच विद द इंस्टीट्यूट, they'll let you know। ठीक है, तो shall I end this lecture now? करें, चलिए देन, थैंक यू फॉर योर टाइम, सी यू टुमारो, सुबह वही 8 बजे, ठीक है।